Please, to be started.
I can confirm, Madam Chair, that the live stream has been started, and if I could just ask everyone in the room to please have their laptop on silent if possible.
I'll just give you a few moments to do that whilst I do the general introductions. So welcome everyone to today's meeting. My name is Christy Bogston and I'm the chair of the Management Board for this meeting being held on Tuesday the 17th of January 2023. Before we get formally underway, I would like to just run through some important housekeeping details, please. We are not expecting any fire alarm testing this afternoon, so for those of us in attendance in person, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for viewing on the Heritage Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Heritage Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible into the microphones provided and keep background noise to a minimum. Please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent, including your laptops, please. Others in attendance are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, providing that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, then you please raise your hand now so that any such person filming or making photography may be made aware. Thank you very much. So the procedure and etiquette for the meeting: only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. Under current legislative provisions, those online may contribute to the questions and debate, but they will not be able to vote. For those people in attendance as virtual participants, can I request you use your raise hand function if they wish to contribute? Now, I do believe we have a couple of members online virtually, so can I please ensure you can hear and be heard? So, Councillor Jonathan Lester.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Chair. Can hear you and see you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Fagan.
Afternoon, Chair. I can see and hear you. Thank you. And
Councillor John Harrington.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I can see and hear you. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And before we move into the apologies, I'd also just like to welcome everyone. I have a number of members of the executive here in attendance. Councillor Hitchner, Councillor Harvey, Councillor Toynbee, Councillor Davies, Councillor Crockett, Councillor Tyler and Councillor Harrington, and I also have some Heritage Council officers in attendance today as well. John Coleman, Andrew Lovegrove, Rachel Hart, Ross Cook, Tony Hall, Darryl Freeman, Henry Merricks, Bertrand Floyd, welcome, and Alfie Rees-Glenos. So welcome, and I'd also like to welcome Councillor Shaw to his first Scrutiny Management Board, so thank you for your attendance today. So moving into the agenda, apologies for absence. Apologies, please.
Chair, I've received no apologies for absence.
Thank you. And therefore no name substitutes. Declarations of interest. May I ask members if there are any declarations of interest in respect to the items on the agenda? No? Moving on to agenda item 4 in terms of the minutes. So firstly, I'll start with the minutes from our meeting on the 28th of November 22 on pages 9 to 11 of your agenda pack. Noting any changes made in agenda item 9 later on of this meeting to HR and workforce strategy report. Are there any further changes or amendments by committee members? Can I please see a show of hands then for passing minutes? Thank you very much. Any abstentions? One. Thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on 9th January 2023 are still being prepared for review by the committee. So as such, I'm proposing that those minutes are agreed at our next meeting, which is currently scheduled for the 14th of March. So can I see your acceptance of that? Thank you. So moving on to agenda item 5, questions from members of the public. We have received one question from a member of the public. A response to that question has been published as a supplement within the agenda and papers of this meeting. Are there any supplementary questions from members of the public that have been requested?
Yes, Chair, we've received one supplementary question, which the questioner has asked is read out on their behalf.
Please bear with us whilst it is brought up on the screen.
So the supplementary question is as follows. Hopefully the DCS's letter will be on the meeting's webpage. However, I reiterate, would the SMB recommend that a strategy to reduce the high rate of looked after children is implemented as soon as possible? The rate of children coming into care is about that of statistical neighbours, but the looked after children rate is considerably higher, 24th of the 11th 22 Cabinet meeting. Therefore, the focus should be on the latter. Sufficiency is a corporate risk, support and advocacy inexpensive. Costly, over budget, looked after children are reduced by statutorily recommended family group conferences. The Cabinet agreed Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee's recommendation. Family group conference model will be targeted for implementation by 2023. However, improvement plan, the final version states determine family group conferences, model and approach by April 2023. FGCs would reduce expensive proceedings, twice the rate of statistical neighbours. Would the SMB recommend ensure that the FCGs are implemented by April 2023?
Thank you for your question. Today's meeting will be focusing principally on scrutinising the budget. It's not within the remit of the Scrutiny Management Board to recommend that family group conferences are implemented by April 2023. So I will invite the Cabinet member to provide you with a written response. Moving on to agenda item 6, questions from members of the Council.
There are no questions from members of the Council.
Thank you. I would now like to move on to the main item for today's meeting. Firstly, I would like to thank all officers, Cabinet and members for your attendance today. I would also like to extend my thanks for the papers and presentations that have been provided ahead of this item, with special thanks to corporate directors for community wellbeing, children's services and economy and environment for their pre-recorded explanatory narratives provided with their presentations. I recognise this request was a departure from normal conventions, and I'm grateful to you for accommodating this request. We all found them very useful, and it has allowed us to focus today's meeting on specific questions to Cabinet members. These pre-recorded narratives contain no new information to that contained in the papers. However, I have asked that they be published on our YouTube channel after the meeting in the interest of openness and transparency. I wish to remind members that we have a scheduled 3-hour meeting for today's meeting, and we have a lot of business to cover in that time. So I wish to give committee members notice that it is my intention to ensure questions are succinct as possible and focused. I will be asking members to be brief in both their questions and developing their lines of inquiry. May I also remind members that questions must be directed to the appropriate Cabinet member or Cabinet members. Officers in attendance should only be invited to provide responses on technical matters and information. If I may also ask that Cabinet members keep their responses brief, it will assist the committee greatly, ensuring all committee members have the opportunity to ask their questions. All committee members have read and been briefed on the matters under consideration, so Cabinet members can work on the assumption that detailed explanation will only be required where prompted by committee members. Finally, in the event that the committee wish to make any recommendations to Cabinet, I may seek to take a short adjournment to allow the acting statutory scrutiny officer and committee clerk to finalise the wording of each of the recommendations. I will then ask for those recommendations to be presented to the committee for agreement. So the aim of today's meeting is to provide demonstrable, constructive challenge to draft budget proposals for 23-24, identifying the main budget assumptions, pressures, risks, and gain assurances that the budget is balanced, robust, financially and legally compliant, and deliverable. The role of scrutiny is also to review the strategic big picture, as well as the detail of a budget, and take an overview across the council rather than just by department. In preparation for today's meeting, the Scrutiny Management Board have received reports in September and October 2022, which included details around public consultation, significant budget issues and pressures, pay inflation and incremental uplift, social care inflation and rising demand, general inflationary pressures, key assumptions and pressures, and an outline of the Council's options to balance the budget. We have reviewed Quarter 1, 22-23 and Quarter 2, 22-23 budget and performance reports to seek assurance that progress has been made towards delivery of the agreed budgets and targets, that the reasons for major variances or underperformance were understood and being addressed, as well as to provide an understanding of budget pressures that will inform the 23-24 budget proposals. We have also reviewed the Council's Treasury Management Strategy and Minimum Revenue Provision Review Report. I would now like to open debate immediately for agenda item 7, and in doing so, provide an open question to each cabinet member in turn. So I'd like to ask each cabinet members if they could potentially respond to 3 questions. Does each member of cabinet agree with the proposed budget? Do they believe it is achievable and financially and legally compliant? And what are the tough decisions you have had to take and consequential impact to your portfolio risk profile? So if we're able to start with those 3 questions for each of the cabinet members, and perhaps if we can start with children's and families. So Councillor Toynbee.
Could you repeat that, please, Chair?
Yes, certainly.
That went very quickly.
So do you agree with the proposed budget? Do you believe it is achievable and financially and legally compliant? And what are the tough decisions you have had to take and consequential impact to your portfolio risk profiles, if any?
Wow. Yes to the first 2. Tough decisions, yes. There have been a lot of tough decisions, and also a lot of tough decisions for all my colleagues on Cabinet, obviously. Because we're statutory services, the decisions that we have to make are somewhat different, and we have to prioritise. We have to do what's best for the children and families in Herefordshire, and the nature of the service is that it's difficult to predict, it's difficult to forecast, and we just have to make decisions as the need arises. So yeah, we're constantly making difficult decisions.
Thank you, Councillor Toynbee. Maybe health and wellbeing, Councillor Crockett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Again, yes to the first 2 questions. We've thought long and hard. We've worked really, really hard, and we all know and appreciate every year we're up against budget constraints. We have an increasing need in adult social care, and the demand is phenomenal. If anybody says we have an ageing population again, I think I'll blow my lid, because we're all ageing. We'll all have aged by at least 3 hours this afternoon by the time we leave. And we're not stuck in a parallel universe, or we're not in Benjamin Button's world. So we really have to look forward and support our residents that are perhaps older than 65 for the future. We need to continue to look at solutions and ways forward to address, the huge demand without any extra money. The director and the team have worked day in, day out to find better ways of delivery. Sadly, that's not going to get any shorter. It's just going to be a tougher job for them all. And I welcome Scrutiny's comments, discussion, and any recommendations to assist us in this budget delivery. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tyler for Housing Regulatory Services and Safety, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the questions. I'd like to reiterate yes to the first two questions. Tough decision. Yes. I'm a back office delivery service, which you don't really see a lot of what the officers do, but they deliver time and time again for the services that are required for Herefordshire Council, especially with our residents. It's been difficult. We're having to look at transformational changes to the directorate, and that may involve different services being cut, but we're looking to outsource as well. But I can't go without saying to the officers how hard they have worked on trying to balance the budgets for this economy and environment, as what Ross Cook has done. And I would like to reiterate that any budget that we do bring forward, what we bring forward, has been a very difficult decision, and I hate cutting. I hate cutting services, but we have to deliver the services that are required, and that's how I feel in my directorate at the moment. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Tyler. Councillor Gemma Davis, Commissioning Procurement and Assets.
Thanks for the questions, and again, as no surprise, the first two, the answer is yes. This isn't a short process. We have spent weeks, months going through all of these. What I can say is that we're in, thankfully, a better position than some of the things that were put before us previously. The main considerations that I have been that we do this as an equalities-based budget. So any decision that we have and any impact that we have, that we mitigate it as best as we can. So, for example, looking at changes to increasing council tax, as an example, that we end up looking after those that need the most help, that are most vulnerable in society. My biggest thing is around contracts, and you'll see that what some of the budget pressures are around inflation on those contracts, specifically the waste contract is one. And what I have asked as mitigation is that we go through all of our corporate commercial contracts and say, what are those linked inflations, and can that be shared with our commercial partners so that the gap between public services and private sector doesn't continue to get bigger. So that's one thing that we're going to do in the future. The other thing for me is around the biggest impact for me around some of these things are the impact on the public. So, for example, around the bank holiday collections for waste, that won't be a positive decision for members of the public. But I hope that they're able to see that we have to put people above everything else. That's what we're meant to do. That's what we're meant to do. We're meant to look after the most vulnerable. And I also have concerns on the morale of staff when we're making cuts such as this. And I note that in Ross Cook's presentation, he talked about how we're going to engage with staff. So those are my main concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. John Harrington, Infrastructure Transport, please.
Did you say Councillor Harrington in between Councillor Crockett coughing?
Yes, I did. Councillor Harrington, all yours.
Yes. What was the first question again, please?
Do you agree with the proposed budget, and do you believe it's achievable?
Well, believe is an interesting question. I mean, do I believe in reducing the budgets? No, I don't believe in reducing budgets, but what choice do we have? So I certainly think it's achievable. And the tough decisions we've made have been not as bad as they could have been, because fortunately we had got a slightly better settlement at the lastminute.com than we thought we were going to get. And that has enabled me not to make one of the major proposed savings in my portfolio, which would have been reducing some of the public realm budget. Particularly, that would have been highly significant, and you know, we were able not to have to do that now. Quite considerable changes would have been had to made to what we accept in terms of parameters for things like road defects, and potentially reducing staff, which fortunately we don't have to do. But the question, in a way, that I would very much appreciate Scrutiny's help on in future is, what the heck are we going to do in the future? You know, we can't keep reducing the budget. We spent about £15 million a year in 2011 on the public realm. We spend about £5 now, and it's continued to decrease. I quite frankly don't know how we're going to get through the next round, but that's where we are now. We have got through this round.
Thank you, Councillor Harrington. And then I don't believe Ellie Chance is here from Environment and Climate. Perhaps if I look to Councillor Harvey and Councillor Hitchin, if you had any further comments as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I do agree with the budget that we've brought before you. It's been a tough journey to get us to be able to present a balanced budget here. But I think there are some good news stories in here. We're able to continue to invest in capital programmes, and I'd just like some clarification. Have we gone to item 8, the budget, or are we on the capital investment budget, which is item 7?
We're on item 7.
We're on item 7. So would you like me to confine my comments in answering your question to the capital investment budget?
I think it's quite difficult to differentiate between the two. I think we do have some specific lines of inquiry that we would like to address as part of the capital investment. But in your brief response now, if you can provide an overview, and then we can go into the detail when we get to the revenue agenda item 8. Okay, well in that case, in making comments across items 7 and 8, if I can draw committee members' attention to the table at paragraph 4 on page 266 of the agenda pack. That's giving an overview of the proposed 2023-2024 budget. And if you compare the base case column total of £175,908,000 and the 2023-24 proposed budget of £193,308,000, despite having to make savings in certain areas, which include transformation programmes which are ongoing in the directorates, and efficiencies in terms of being able to look to deliver services in new ways in order to be able to continue to keep them going. We do actually have a growth budget here. So we're moving from 175 million to 193 million in terms of the total budget for the council, and that's taking account of £37.5 million worth of service demand pressures across the directorates, and £20 million worth of savings efficiencies and transformation programme improvements. So managing the pressures is a huge part of what we have to do across the services. And I think you can see from the numbers in the pressures column, where children's are dealing with over £13 million worth of pressures in year, in addition to the improvement programme which continues to be delivered. There are massive pressures in parts of the council's services, which are really difficult to reconcile. So, have we made tough decisions? Yes, we have had to, and I think you can see in the detail of the information provided for each directorate that they are both managing pressures and also delivering savings, whilst also continuing with the day job of the service delivery and delivering on capital programme investments which run alongside service transformations and also maintaining our capital infrastructure. So we have a balanced budget here. We have a budget which allows us to continue to invest in what's important. This has been a massive team effort, and you can see that some areas are taking a larger amount of the burden of delivering savings in order to enable some other areas to concentrate on transformation and managing pressures. But we need to act as a team across all of the directorates, and I'd like to thank our directors and the entire leadership team for the work that they've put in over the last 6 months
in strategising this and working together. We have had a better overall settlement than we had feared in the autumn, but as a council, we are still below the midpoint in terms of the amount of funding that we received in that settlement compared to other authorities. And we also have, in real terms, taken a cut for the third year running in terms of our rural services grant, because it's staying at a common cash level. And of course, we're obviously having to manage the pressures and inflation impacts now across 3 years on a flat cash rural services grant. So I'm very grateful that we receive it, because it amounts to about 5% uplift in council tax if we didn't receive it. But nevertheless, it is diminishing in real terms in terms of the pressures that we face delivering services into the only council in England which meets the definition of being truly rural, just to put Herefordshire's position in perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. And Councillor Kitchener, as covering corporate strategy, and further brief comments before we go into specific questions.
Well, yes, as a whole, Cabinet, we do agree with this budget. Is it achievable and legally compliant? Absolutely it is. We have a requirement. We work through the offices to make sure there is a balanced budget. The main challenge is, of course, funding is not unlimited. It would be very wonderful to have unlimited money and decide we have to work within the income which we are hoping to achieve. It needs to be accountable to the public, so in making decisions as to which areas to concentrate and focus money on and ones to take the money off, we have to be accountable. We have to work out what we think is appropriate for the county, for the people of this county. Thirdly, I would just reiterate the point made by Councillor Davis about the staff. We have a duty to employees in the council. They've worked incredibly hard to deliver this particular budget. They're working really hard in the current year. We do appreciate all they're doing. We do have a duty to make sure that we look after them and we don't push them too far. And finally, I think the unknown really is about inflation. I mean, who knows what the level of inflation is going to be? There are some suggestions the year after next there'll be deflation, which will be a very extraordinary circumstance for us to be dealing with. It's really is one of the big unknowns. We've taken advice. We have to at some point in time decide where we're going to pitch those unknowns and the assumptions we're going to make, and we have done that in a way which we think is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hitchener. I'd now like to look to committee for questions and on agenda item 7, capital budget. And I think if we can, we have 4 specific lines of inquiry that we would like to explore today. The first one is robustness of the information. Second one is treasury management implications. Third is the use of reserves, and then 4th, some project-specific questions. So if we're able to go through those each in turn, and if you could raise your questions relevant to each particular area, I think that will aid in the scrutiny of the capital budget in a more timely manner. So if we can kick off with questions specifically around the robustness of the information. If I can see hands, please, for questions. Councillor Summers.
Thank you, Chair. And David Hitchener brought up my concern right away is the unknown. What's happened on the Home Lacey Causeway this past week, we're suddenly into a big expense that has to be done because it's a safety issue. And as a councillor, more often than not, I hear next financial year, we'll do it. We can't do it this financial year, we'll do it next financial year. We've seen years of, as far as I'm concerned, of kicking the can down the road or robbing Peter to pay Paul. Now, if you're in business, you soon go bankrupt with that. Councils don't. But we need to know that instead of those ones that are in the next financial year or in this financial year, are they going to be done? And I think because something else is going to come along that might prevent that. So question, I guess, more than anything else is, should we be borrowing to cover the stuff that actually needs doing, because we don't know what's going to happen because of the unknowns?
And who are you putting your question to, Councillor Summers?
I guess Councillor Harvey would be the most likely one to answer that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Summers, and you know, you're right to be concerned about the unknown unknowns. I think maybe the Home Lacey Causeway falls into the category of a known unknown because it's repeatedly getting inundated and needing to be repaired. But you're quite right, the where on earth do we get the money from question is something that we do have to consider. Broadly across the capital programme, I draw members' attention to paragraph 17 on page 16 of the agenda pack, where you can see how the overall medium-term financial strategy, treasury management strategy, is showing how the new prudential borrowing associated with the capital programme is against the 4 years of the medium-term financial strategy. And I know that the committee was concerned about carry in from previous years and carry out from this year into next year in terms of programmes that were planned to be delivered this year that are sliding to different degrees into next financial year. I think that's the reality of the capital programme, and if you look back over many years for this council, that has repeatedly been the case. I can see Councillor Shaw nodding from bitter experience. It's just, you know, events don't vary. It's how the programme goes. Some things go to plan, other things don't. Some things happen a bit faster, not very many of them, to be fair. It always seems to take longer to do things. I think one of the good things is the Project Management Office is bringing in some really experienced project managers, and we're for capital programmes able to get project managers who are expert in delivering the kind of capital programmes that we have before us. So I think Marlbrook School is a good example of a programme that was delivered under budget and ahead of time, I think, being managed by a project manager who was a specialist in delivering schools' capital programmes. So by doing that, we did actually make sure that that was a project that did what it said on the tin, had its Bronson moments.
So Councillor Harvey, so I think Councillor Sam's specific question, should we be borrowing more?
Well, I think what you can see in table 17 is that we're pulling forward some of the borrowing limit from 24-25 into 23-24, which means that we're actually starting some projects earlier because we're bringing that borrowing forward, in the expectation that overall some will slip and it'll even itself out. But what we can do is start more going now, and hopefully by doing that we can get ahead on some of the projects that run smoothly, and reduce the amount of carry-in into the next financial year. So we're using some of that borrowing power by sliding it forward into the coming financial year. Borrowing more than that, we have to have the revenue funding to be able to cover the repayments. So we do have to balance that out. If we can make headroom in terms of our revenue budget, then it does give us the capacity to borrow more. But presently what we're doing is doing treasury management prudently, and we're using our borrowing capacity across the MTFS to start bringing some of these capital programmes a little further forward earlier.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. May I just ask potentially Mr. Andrew Lovegrove, if you could provide some technical explanation on this page for the table, there's lots of different headings in terms of capital grant funding, redirected funding, capital receipt funding, funded by ROI, and corporate funding PB. Could you give those members of the public that may be listening and also members of the committee a brief explanation of each of those headings, please?
Chair, I'm happy to, which page are we talking about? I'm not sure.
Page 16.
Page 16.
And it's paragraph 16.
Oh, I see, okay. Yes, so it's a capital grant funding post where we're getting grants from external bodies coming through with the government and other type of places. In terms of redirected funding, that's coming from the reserve, that's relating to the acquisition of the equipment to provide the waste changes that comes from the waste collection, waste disposal services. Capital receipt funding, that's where we sell things to provide a return, bring the cash back in. Return, funded by ROI, return on investment, so that's where we're borrowing money and repaying the cost of borrowing. And corporate funded PB is that prudential borrowing, as Councillor Harvey said in the table, page 17, show our annual funding limit built into the budget, both revenue and capital, is £6.7 million. So if you wanted to increase that year on year, you'd have to increase the cost of borrowing in the revenue budget.
Thank you, Mr. Ledgrove.
I just finish up on my question. I was just, I've lost my train of thought. Okay, never mind, but
Okay, we
you'll
can come back to
me
you,
later.
Councillor Summers.
Thank you.
I think I have Councillor Swinglehurst next, and followed by Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Chair. I think some of the questions that I had have just been answered by Mr. Lovegrove, so thank you for that. I am interested in the actual sort of business plan section, looking at retrofitting. There was discounting of the more ambitious schemes due to affordability, funding affordability, because they are, very ambitious schemes. Nevertheless, we have a commitment to net zero 2030. So I'm kind of curious with the level of ambition that we set there, whether that's going to produce a risk in our ambition to get to net zero as a county 2030, and how we're going to mitigate that. Has anybody kind of tracked that through and looked at alternative ways of funding by way of partnering with households or whatever, kind of being quite a bit creative about how we do that? Because I don't see our major carbon impact is heating. It's a really big part of the equation, and if we can't take some very big actions, I think it might be a struggle. I don't know. I'm just sort of guessing that. I haven't seen how the glide path would work out. Obviously, that'd probably be one for Councillor Chowns, who's not here. So I don't know who wants to pick up on that. Councillor Harvey, thank you.
Yeah, good question. I think as a council, the work that we've been doing to reduce our own carbon footprint is going well, and I think we continue to be slightly ahead of our forecast position in the plan, so that's good. We obviously have a leadership role in terms of encouraging the entire county to reduce its carbon emissions. As far as our own ambitions are concerned, clearly it's important that we understand what the capability is of our own capital holdings, our own buildings and accommodation, to be capable of being retrofitted, and not all of the older buildings are able to do that. We have to look at all of our schools' premises and to identify which of our schools are able to be retrofitted for the future. And there is a programme of work that's going on at the moment to undertake those assessments, so that we understand which schools are and aren't going to be able to be buildings of the future out in our communities, and where we may need to look to plan to build new as part of our schools' capital strategy. As far as our own energy consumption is concerned, officers are in the process of putting together a view of our energy use across our property portfolio. And we have West Mercia Energy, of which we're one of 4 local authority shareholders on that, and that helps us manage the cost of our energy, by buying energy futures and giving us some certainty in terms of our energy costs. We're in the advantageous position at the moment, therefore, of them having bought us a future position, which gives us lower energy costs than would be the case if we were buying purely from the market right now. And we have a closing window on that, because eventually we will their futures will move into the space that everybody else is in now, where energy prices are really high. So what we're looking at doing is identifying what action we need to be taking to be mitigating within our own property portfolio right now, and where we need to take decisions about whether we need to change the mix of our property for the future, because we need to have a property portfolio both that matches the future council's needs and also is capable of being energy efficient and operating effectively.
So, and just to go back to the sort of the more county-wide ambition, which so thank you for a very thorough answer about our own ambitions as an authority. Is there any thinking across to community wellbeing and whether or not there's a particular piece of work that should be done looking at the old people living in fuel poverty or simply in houses that they can't afford to heat, which is not necessarily the same thing, and whether there's a specific advantage looking at that in terms of supporting community wellbeing and also supporting net zero? That's not an option in here. So.
Well, the more ambitious project for providing assistance to people in the community who need to better insulate their homes simply is not affordable. And there's also an issue to do with using public money to benefit a few people rather than many people.
But has consideration been given to a model, such as a charge against property?
We're looking at different alternatives, but government is a very big influencer in what it is we are and aren't able to do. And at the moment, government is a little bit behind the curve in terms of following up on its words with money and action in terms of climate change action. We'll do what we can within the county, and if it's a case of looking at taking a capital interest in people's properties, if that's the way they want to do things, equity release and that sort of thing is already open to people who feel that it's worthwhile them investing now to improve their properties and then reaping the benefit throughout the lifetime that they own a property. We're providing a lot of advice at the moment, and some of the money that we took decisions on in terms of providing advice and support as a consequence of the cost of living crisis was enabling advisors to help people look specifically at what the issues are in their own homes. And some of that money is targeted particularly through Age UK to providing advice to older people who may be living in homes which are difficult to heat.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Stark.
Thanks, Chair. I want to go back to the robustness of the figures, or should I say the volatility of the figures. We're going through an unprecedented time in terms of inflation, particularly in terms of inflation when it applies to things like construction prices index. And we're going to take this capital programme to full council in February. And we have had slippage in the past, Chair. Perhaps it's not been as critical in terms of the overall cost. But I'd like to ask Councillor Harvey to start with, how believable are these figures that we've got before us in the capital programme? Given that we've got a construction price index, which I think is in double-digit inflation, where in my experience in fire authorities, we've had a couple of calls on some of the developments we've been doing within a matter of months for extra money from those that tendered for it. Is there any contingency built in this? Because I'm very concerned that we go to full council, we say, right, we want, say, 100 million or whatever it is for our capital programme. And we know we have slippage, we know reasons why we might have slippage, might be technical reasons, you can't get the land in time if it's to do with city housing or whatever. But I'm really concentrating on the volatility in the actual marketplace at the moment. And what you've done in terms of trying to make these figures as robust as possible, whether there's contingencies built into it, or whether you should be coming to full council as a cabinet and warning us about that and saying, well, these are the figures that are in front of you, we cannot guarantee that will be the price, say, next month or even next year. Because that's the point about robustness and volatility.
Well, you've got a pack of business cases alongside the capital programme, and there is contingency built into the business cases in the way that they've been costed up. So you can see where the contingency sits within the business cases and the amount of it in comparison to the total cost of each programme. Now that's the best figures that we have presently. Presently, we have double-digit inflation.
Yeah.
So those contingencies and the costs that we have been built up knowing that we have double-digit inflation now, and that that's being forecast out into the future for some considerable way by financial experts. So that's the best information that we have and the best information that we can provide to council. We're none of us mind readers, we're none of us got crystal balls, but what we've done is taken the best view that we're able to with the forecast that professionals provide and the contingency that you can see built into those business cases. And that's where we're at on them. If some of those end up coming in at different prices, that will be as it is every year with the capital programme. But obviously, the double-digit inflation will have a greater impact and therefore is sharpening our minds.
So the answer is, when you come to full council, you will be able to assure us as far as you can that these figures have been tested against what's happening in the market at the moment.
Well, the business cases have been built up and they're there for you to see.
Yeah, but when you say professional input, do you mean have you got professionals from the construction side, or is it just professionals in the council that have looked at these figures, or have we had external experts looking at it?
We haven't had anybody audit the business cases,
right, okay,
if that's what you're asking, but we have capital programmes underway right now which are giving us live feedback, if you like, in terms of the temperature of the market and the degree to which it's moving, as the pieces of work are being done. And that market knowledge is part of what our officers are using when they're putting these business cases together. And then those cases are themselves tested through the review process. So not all of the business cases that you can see as part of this programme have made it through that process.
So when you talk about review, we will be presented with these figures in February, but you will have a review process to go back and test whether the figures are still realistic?
No, this is the budget.
You won't have any?
No, we're not moving it because, it would be non-constitutional for us to be presenting you with something different as council from what we're giving you as scrutiny.
So we have to allow for the fact that will take on board whatever the inflation volatility is. Because if it doesn't, then it won't happen.
That's been built into how we have put the business cases together.
I think you need to say that to council, particularly when you present these figures.
Well, maybe you can as scrutiny.
Well, I'm not sure that's our job, but we'll think about it.
Thank you. I focusing on that, on some of those figures, I guess, and the robustness and recognising that there has been sort of slippages in the past. I mean, looking at some of the figures, 22-23 capital budget, 99 million. We did an inline reprofiling of about 64 million, which is about 66%. In 21-22, budget of 98 million was reprofiled by about 69 million. I think one of your, what have you been doing differently this year to try and reduce the amount of delays and reprofiling required in year for capital investments, or should we be expecting a similar reprofiling exercise in the upcoming year?
As I think in the answer that I gave to Councillor Summers, there is inevitably the programme as planned will not be the programme as delivered, because it never is, it never has been, and it won't be at any point in the future, because that, with the best will in the world, how you plan things to happen and how they actually happen are always slightly different. So in some cases, it's difficult getting people to respond to tenders. In other cases, it's difficult getting materials.
I appreciate that, Councillor Harvey, but we're talking about a 60 to 70% reprofiling of the capital budget, and we're already in, say, Q2. We've only just looked at Q2 figures. So so you're saying that is an inevitable, so we should be expecting another 60 to 70% sort of reprofiling in the new year? Or would say the project management officers and the work and the money being spent on the project management office should help reduce that significantly? Or should we expect that? Because that will have further implications with treasury management, etc., when we get down to those further lines of inquiry.
Well, you can see there's some borrowing that's being pulled forward so that we can enter the year with a larger programme than would be the case in the expectation that not all of it will get delivered. But there's also been a very tough review process to try and make sure that we've really poked a stick quite hard at the programmes that are entering the capital programme now, and the project management office is working on the programmes that are already in the programme that continue into next year, as I said, with Marlborough School and with other projects, to increase the likelihood of them being delivered within budget and to time. But, we have war in Ukraine and other things which are having an influence on supply chains.
But hopefully we'll be expecting a less reprofiling because of those controls that you've implemented.
I would hope so, yes.
And it's constitutional.
Yes.
Yes.
Councillor Howes, I believe, is next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I want to talk about business cases. I have to say, I found it a bit difficult to follow, if I'm honest, but I managed to get there. The project schools accessibility works. I was pleased to see that we're investing in projects which help people with disability and special education needs are being developed. That was great. There were 6 projects. Really important in terms of it's recognised as part of our improvement plan. We need to improve our SEND capabilities. That's really great to see. I was particularly interested in Westfield School though, because although that's one of the 6 projects that are listed for adaptation for children with disability, I was pretty interested in the bigger project for Westfield School.
Sorry, Councillor Howes, is this in relation to the robustness of the information, or can we capture this one when we go to the
I was looking for a heading in which, it's a project-based one, which is in this heading.
Because we're going to cover the project-specific questions towards the end. We're just going to cover robustness of information at the moment, treasury management, and then useful reserves, and then move on to project-specific.
Yeah, it's a high-level explanation.
If we can.
Well, they didn't say, okay, if you want me to go, when do you want me to put it together then?
I can call you forwards when we talk about specific questions around the project. If you can focus on any robustness of the information, any further questions around that at the moment.
Well, it did say in this section about project. It's not clear where you want me to ask the question, sorry.
If it's specific to a particular, we're focusing on the robustness of information at the moment.
Yes, and there's a specific project for Westfield School that in the capital report in paragraph 20.
So if it's specific around, if you can specifically ask your question then, please.
Yes, it was about the rebuild of Westfield School, which has not progressed as it was not affordable within the current borrowing levels, and thought external funding could be sought. Now, we were instrumental as Scrutiny in getting the review of Westfield School, so the sixth form school wasn't taken away and developed. So an important part of development of our special education age capability. But I see it's not been done, it's not in the current project list.
But I think it's a really important project, and I wondered why it wasn't in their project list.
And who would you like that to respond to that question?
Well, I guess it's one for Councillor Davies, yes.
Yeah, it's one of mine, along with Councillor Toynbee and Councillor Harvey. I guess that goes really testament to the business cases that we now do. So they really do test the information and test our borrowing, and also look at the greatest need. And in this year, it's not there, but what I can tell you is that the works are continuing. But when it's at the point where a business case gets through, it will be in the budget. But I think it really does show testament to the fact that if it's not robust, if it's not got through all of the stages that we have within our business cases, then it won't go forward. It doesn't mean to say it's off at all. And I do believe it was only a couple of weeks ago that we had a briefing around the engagement work that's continuing.
So the
I think I
commitment
can't say anymore because the
commitment to develop it is still there as soon as possible.
Of course, I think we all need to understand around Westfield about its suitability of where it's based at the moment, and its capacity to grow, because I think it's really important that it remains. But that's Councillor Toynbee's area. Mine's just around the actual build.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I completely understand the frustration around this, because I know we've been talking about it for literally years, and I've had a lot of meetings about it, so I really understand. And you know, we all want the same thing. We all want the best possible service, and it's all tied in as well as what Gemma was saying with the local plan for Leominster and you know, council-owned property reviews and all that kind of thing. So, so I do hope there'll be something concrete in the next budget. And you know, as Gemma said, work is going on.
So I think I have 3 more questions around the robustness before we move on to treasury management implications. Councillor Norman, Fagan, and then Watson, please.
Thank you. Not sure where mine fits, but it's actually following on and has been partly covered by the question asked by Councillor Swinglehurst. So I'll stick it in here and how it goes. So as I say, part of it has been addressed, I think, but it's really how you balance or how you consider, and this may be different in each directorate, that the whole sort of concept of invest to save. It's a really difficult one, obviously, because the more we get in early, the cheaper things will be, literally, in the sense that everything gets more expensive in terms of materials and all the rest, but also the much wider and much more difficult to pin down business of the cost of not doing something in terms of health and well-being, or even if you're looking at something very concrete and basic like roads, they get worse if you leave them, the longer you leave them. I mean, it's all very obvious stuff to say, but how do you reach that sort of balance in making judgment and fixing, or getting agreement on what to take forward and what to delay? So not an easy one. I'm not sure there's any specific answer, but I'd be very interested in knowing how any of the directors, or perhaps simply Councillor Harvey, how you sort of pin that or decide.
Councillor Harvey.
I think the operational case is made alongside business case. We've got some lines in there that are to do with works that need to be done for maintenance and for safety. As has already been identified, there are some works in there that will enable disabled children to attend mainstream schools, and the more schools that are capable of catering for disabled young people to be educated amongst their peers, the better for them and for everybody to have a fully inclusive education. And then you come to operational things like the IT and the server hardware that is needing to be purchased in order to keep council systems going and to have our data held in the right place to make sure that we protect it and look after it. And those cases are made as part of the review process of the business cases as the capital programmes are put together. And then a judgment's made over what we could afford. And as you can see, in pulling some of the borrowing forward from next year into this coming year, what we're trying to do is to assist more programmes to actually come forward than would be the case if we limited ourselves only to the amount of borrowing within one financial year.
Thank you. Councillor Fagan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And can I just clarify, because somebody was coughing when you were talking about recommendations, are you sort of taking recommendations at the end of the agenda item? And also the question is, can I, as a virtual attendant, can I make a recommendation? Could you clarify for me?
Yes, certainly. If you add through the debate, if there are recommendations that are identified, we can note them as we go, and then we will conclude at the end to agree and have people vote on them.
Okay.
In terms of being virtual, you certainly couldn't vote on it, but if members in attendance were supportive of your recommendation, then as chair, I'd be happy to have them noted and voted on.
Okay, thanks. So my question is to Councillor Harvey, and it's really about of course the capital budget and the project management office. So what I'd like to know, I mean, obviously when looking through the budget, we can see that the project management office is a growing expense for the council, and we know that that's quite a new development, having the project management office. So what I want to know is the project management office enabling us to deliver capital budgets in time and on budget? It's a simple question, that one.
Yes.
Okay. So that thank you. But if that is the case, then what I would like to recommend is that we actually sort of make sure that we're actually borrowing in order to maintain momentum on these capital projects, because we know that capital projects are not able to deliver in their timescales usually, and that I'd like to recommend that we support this approach to pull more capital projects forward into 2023-24, because we've got this increase in the project management office capacity, and that we make a commitment to the sort of following financial year's borrowing in order to maintain that momentum, because if we keep waiting, it seems that the costs will make these projects unviable. So we need these projects to keep Herefordshire moving forward, to support service delivery, and make sure that the capital infrastructure of the county is fit for purpose. Yeah, so if I could sort of throw that into the mix, please.
Thank you, Councillor Fagan. We'll note that down, and then we can revisit it towards the end of the point. I'd like to ask Councillor Watson as well next.
Great, thank you. I'd also like to say thanks to Councillor Davis, actually, because out of all the cabinet members, she's the one that was actually specific about the tough decisions that had to be made within her directorate. So thank you for that, Councillor Davis. My question is actually relating to at our last meeting, we were looking at the delivery plan dashboard, but in terms of financial and budget setting, how are the risks associated with program delivery identified, monitored and reported, please? Could someone explain how it's done, thanks?
Perhaps start with Councillor Harvey.
Oh, well, that would be, I mean, what we're doing is we're putting a budget together which enables us to have the funding available to deliver on those projects and programmes. The risks associated with the delivery of each of them are part of what's assessed in the delivery plan and reported on quarterly through the quarterly performance and delivery plan reports, similar to the one that you looked at in the last meeting, and each one of those projects assesses its progress against plan, and that's why you have red, amber, green type codings against each of them in those progress reports, saying whether they are on plan in terms of delivering against the timescales, whether they're facing difficulties, or whether there are real issues that are holding them up. For example, waiting to hear whether the levelling up funding is going to be approved or not, which is the funding route to enable a particular project to go ahead, as an example. So it wouldn't be in the budget, it would be in the delivery plan in terms of setting out what the objectives are for the whole year, and then reporting against the delivery of those quarterly, in the way that we do as in the normal course of events.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Halley. And last question before we move on to treasury management implications and use of reserves. I think it's more a process question that I'd like to just clarify with Mr. Lovegrove, just for committee's understanding. As a scrutiny committee, we've seen the Q2 budget and performance reports, which had a capital programme in there, and we're now looking at this. I see that there are 8 projects that have either been newly inserted or amended since Q2 budget figures that we received last week, and are not included in the request for approval. So I'd just like you to provide a high-level explanation as to the process of how these new projects get amended and approved, and why there's a difference between the 2 reports.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the Q3 numbers, they're going to cabinet in February, and they'll be available for your March meeting, so you can see those there. In terms of capital projects that are fully funded, the Constitution allows me to add those as a strategy 151 to the capital programme. So I think that's what we're talking about. So if a project receives full funding, or we get asked to be invited to apply for a grant from government, that arrives, it will then be added to the capital programme once satisfied it is 100% funded, and speaking to the portfolio holders of the agreement.
Oh, okay, great. So things like under planning delivery board, we've got E&E section 1 of 6. That's a newly inserted project. We've got under major external funded delivery board, UK Shared Prosperity Fund, Rural Prosperity Fund, and as some examples. So you're saying that they're fully funded through grant funding, so as section 151 officer you can insert that. So it's then down to us to monitor the quarterly reports to see those changes.
So that's one of the ways of monitoring, but also those 2 that you mentioned have been through cabinet, through various cabinet decisions, so you also have them there to put in title of the scrutiny board to see all the papers that come to cabinet, and if you want to call them into your committee to have a look.
Okay, great, thank you. I think there was one risk on follow-up question on risk from Councillor Watson's, and then we'll move on to the treasury management.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's quite an important one. We can talk about risk per project in the capital programme. There's also risk in terms of capacity delivering the whole capital programme. And I want to draw attention to the fact that there's risk in delivering the 20 million of savings, which will need to be project driven. And although Councillor Fagan talks about all this increase in project management, my concern is the pressure on directorate resources here. They're going to have huge pressures on them in terms of not only delivering this capital programme with an area in an uncertain and volatile climate, but they're also being asked to deliver 20 million of savings at the same time. And that's going to have to be project driven as well. And what I'm concerned about is, do we have the capacity as a council to deliver both at the same time? Even though we might be increasing project management experience, there are certain things that will need expertise from the directors when it comes to delivering both the projects in terms of capital programme and the projects in terms of saving. So I want to get an idea, whether it's from the leader or whatever, where the cabinet has actually discussed the overall capacity risk here, particularly that's going to fall on directorates. And I really am looking at E&E again and looking at the sorts of issues that they're going to face. And I'd like an answer to that, but I think that is a big unanswered risk here that's sitting on the table.
It's a very good question. Councillor Stark, in my introduction, I was mentioning about the pressure put on staff within the council. To an extent, we kind of don't have a choice because we have to produce a balanced budget. So if we're to have a balance, if we assume it's going to be too difficult to do, we're going to have to make savings in other ways. So I think we want to be working cooperatively as the cabinet and with the officers to make sure we have something which is in balance. There's been a lot of consultation with the corporate director of that particular area, and he's been working with his staff to come up with some proposals which they are now comfortable to put forward to us as the cabinet. And I have full confidence that by working with the council, with the officers in those ways, we can actually deliver. They are up for it, and they will do their very, very best. Another point I made was about kind of reputation of the council. We're accountable, it's public money, and I think we're all in the same place to our really level best to deliver.
Councillor Harvey, if you have a brief addition.
Yeah, just to say, and we touched on it when we were looking at the Q2 report at the last Scrutiny Management Board meeting. We're also buying in additional resource in terms of interim officers and through the project management office, so that we expand the capacity in order to deliver project management resources booked against the project. So we need to be paying for project management anyway. So that's not an additional cost, but it is extra resource if we buy that in to provide support to the service areas in delivering on those projects. And where we have a need to bring in particular expertise in order to assist with transformation or to undertake particular reviews, as PricewaterhouseCoopers are doing at the moment in supporting the digital strategy and understanding what services are capable transitioning and give us additional capacity that way. So that's one way in which we're addressing that internal capacity need, whilst also building capability by having our own officers working alongside those interims and outside experts.
And you don't think there's any risk doing that at the same time as trying to find 20 million in savings?
Well, that's just business as usual. I mean, if you look at the this year and previous years, we've been delivering transformation alongside savings. That's just part of normal business. It's not a case of savings or transformation. We have to do both, and you can see that in the Children's Directorate even, where there are savings that are starting to be flagged now that are expected to be realised as a consequence of achieving some of those transformations in the way that the service is being delivered.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I'm conscious that there were a number of questions, but hopefully outstanding. But I think given time, we do need to move on to the other areas of the capital budget, and it might be that we can pick up with these few questions.
Chair, you did say I could complete what I lost in my mind a little while ago. Could I finish that, please?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, basically, I'm not sure if it's a question or not, but cost of borrowing against the cost of carrying works forward is a concern for me. Just for an example, on what B4399, we paid 12 months of traffic lights. Now, if we borrowed the money for that, to fix that job, that work, what would have been the result? I'm just, it costs about £1,200 a month, I think, for traffic lights. That's about £12,000 a year a month. Just a question, I'm not sure if it's answerable, but it's something that I think should be looked at in the budget, because there are expenses associated with works, and we have to look at if it's profitable to do it or not. Anyway, thank you.
Councillor Harvey, a quick response?
There are rules about borrowing. We borrow for the capital programme. Repair works and maintenance works are part of revenue spending, and we wouldn't normally borrow in order to support revenue expenditure. That's just not allowed usually.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. So I'd like to move now on to Treasury management implications. If I have any members that wish to raise some questions on that, Councillor Howells, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I raised this last week when we were having a discussion in Treasury management, so possibly you've had time to think about the point I raised. Our Treasury management strategy, which are three elements: security, liquidity and yield. We are heavily focused on security and liquidity. I would say that means we're ultra conservative in terms of our treasury management as a council, which is very commendable. But there's no emphasis on yield whatsoever. And I would argue that means we don't effectively employ our financial assets as we could, given we're a very small authority. So, for example, with all our liquid assets on account, they lose money. Even in low inflation periods, they lose money because the return is very small. So even if a relatively small portion of our treasury management strategy was on yield, we could probably at least compensate for the fact that our liquid investments lose money. So we're not actually depreciating the main source of our resources. And I'd like some thought about why we are so ultra conservative. And in addition to that, we're under borrowed. So I think it's pretty clear we're probably not optimising our financial resources as we could, and it would be worth reviewing that. So what are the views on some type of yield investment so we can compensate for the losses we incur in our liquid investments? And similar borrowings, Councillor Fagan touched upon it, and I think you did last week, Councillor Harvey, that very often our borrowings and the repayment goes way beyond the project period in which we get a return. I don't know if increased borrowings might reduce that so we get a better return. We are under borrowed, and we are, in my mind, too conservative with a small c on our treasury management. So hope that answered my question fairly succinctly. Any thoughts, please?
Councillor Harvey, please.
I'll have a go, and then it might be necessary for me to pass the response ball to Mr. Lovegrove. My concern, I hear what you're saying, Councillor Howells, but my concern is that with double-digit inflation, we would have to go a long way along the risk spectrum in order to find investments that we could make that would deliver us a return which took the level of inflation into account. And I worry that that would take us into extremely high risk territory that really, as a local authority, we would not have the appetite to engage with. So I take your point that the returns that we're getting on the investments that we're making are not matching the level of inflation, and therefore the pace at which costs are racing away from us. But I really don't think there's any investment strategy in the current inflationary and economic market that would enable us to balance that out, not without giving Mr. Lovegrove an aneurysm. But I'll pass over to him for his view on that and risk appetite.
Thank you, I think. There is that very direct relationship between security, liquidity and yield. We could invest to get a higher yield, but we would have to sacrifice or accept a higher level of risk, either about security, will we actually get the money back, or liquidity, or will we have to wait a long time to get it? So it's a very valid point. This is public money, and we do have certainly with a small c approach to treasury management. You may want to have a look at that further, and part of the Scrutiny Management Board is to look at treasury management. We can, to do that, we can get a link to come back and give the committee some advice. But at the moment, the position is, as you've outlined, we invest in secure liquid investments to make sure we get the money back. The reality is that the yield isn't as good as it could be, but then if we were chasing a yield to match inflation, that takes us into some very risky investments on there, and that's probably a territory that for public money, I think we'll all have some sleepless nights about that.
And I think
Can
on that
I
point,
come back on that, Chair?
and I think
Because
on that point, I think we have raised it on our work plan to, for in the new year.
yeah,
to
I think
consider it.
as it happened, I sit on the Treasury board of Lower Severn Internal Drainage Board, as I said, which I thought was pretty obscure, but actually very interesting. And they do just this, they're much more than we are, but they have big capital funds and they invest their money and using trapped funds, which are relatively low risk. In fact, they underperform the overall market, but they certainly get enough to compensate for the losses on their liquidity investments. So I don't think the risk would be beyond what being a very security conscious council would be. And I do think we should make a recommendation, Chair, that we should review whether we shouldn't at least look into some yield-based investments to at least compensate for the fact that our liquid investments depreciate. Thank you.
Okay, we'll note that down to just discuss and agree at the end of the item. Thank you. Any more, if there's any more treasury management questions before we move on to reserves? Yeah. So I'd like to invite any questions from members around reserves policy. Councillor Watson.
My question is to, I think this is to either Councillor Harvey or to Andrew Lovegrove. Does the Herefordshire Council actually have a reserves policy?
That question, Mr. Lovegrove.
Part of the NPFS is the budget papers that come to council set out our reserves policy. So yes, we do have one. I'm not sure whether you have something in mind in terms of what the reserves policy should look like or should cover.
I noted the information, but I didn't see it was called actually a reserves policy. So sorry, that was my misunderstanding. But that is our reserves policy. Could it actually have the word policy on it?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Stark.
Yes, it might be the section 151 officer or Councillor Harvey. During the year, we agreed that we would spend over 11 million more on children's services. And correct me if I'm wrong, I understand that we took it from the financial resilience and risk mitigation earmarked reserve, so that's now virtually zero. Or did we take it from something somewhere else? My worry is we came in with this unforeseen spend throughout the year. Then we took, or someone took a decision that was the best reserve to allocate it against. Going back to the point about policy on reserves, what was the thinking behind that, and where would we get some idea of where that was the right and most optimal path to do it with?
You're talking about two separate things. There's funding that has been of £11.5 million this year, and about 5 million last year, and I think about 4 million in the coming year that's been built into the base budget for children's, which is funding the improvement plan, and that did come from the financial resilience.
That's it, I did, yeah.
And then separately there was the overspend that was forecast at Q1 for the additional costs of residential placements, which is to be funded in terms of an overspend this year from reserves, because it's £6 million overspend is simply not possible to cover in year by in-year savings in other parts of the council's budget.
But when we come to council with these decisions that we're asked to take, how are we to judge that this is the best and most optimal approach to take it from that particular earmarked reserve or not? I'm just trying to understand.
It's not council's decision. Those decisions were taken in cabinet during the year. So in March last year, to fund the improvement plan, there was a cabinet decision that was taken back then, which involved the commitment in the year of the 11.4 million, and the projected requirement into 2023-24 that was part of that improvement plan. Operational decision in terms of where we go to deal with the additional costs of the looked after children in a year. That's a decision that is taken operationally in order to deal with the financial outturn. At the moment, we're forecasting that money will come from reserves because we can't see where else it will come from. In terms of what you're presented with at full council as far as the budget is concerned, it's a case of understanding what the reserves position is, whether we're meeting our statutory responsibilities in terms of holding a general reserve that's between 3 and 5% of our turnover, and whether you consider the reserves that we hold that are earmarked are appropriate and appropriately earmarked.
You see, because the resilience of risk mitigation reserves go down to zero, I don't know what that means for us. I mean, it was there, it was 17 million, now it's zero. And okay, perhaps council wasn't involved in that decision, and now we're presented with a fait accompli almost here, that we've got a reserve that's been wiped out.
So I guess from that perspective, I mean, just looking at some of the figures, Councillor Stark, we started off with this is Appendix E.
Sorry, I should have said that.
So I think for members and members of the public that may be listening, Appendix E was published last night as a supplement, and it outlines the reserve balances from the 31st of March 21, which I understand was about 115 million, and then expected to be
77
by the 31st of the 3rd.
With the resilience and risk mitigation being wiped out.
So you've got 20 million, you've got that 17 million, and then a further 20 million of reserves expected to be used. I guess the question is that also looking forward to the medium-term financial strategy, the fact that it isn't balanced. That this is a significant percentage usage of reserves. It looks like it's something that's going to continue. So is this sustainable?
Or is it optimal?
And optimal.
Yeah.
Is what going to continue?
Is high percentage use of reserves, because I'm assuming the resilience reserve of 17 million was COVID related. And if we exclude that, the extra 20 million, I mean, that's 18% of the original balance. I've got my trusty pink calculator here. I can calculate the rest of the percentages. It's a large percentage movement in reserves. And looking forward to the MTF, yes, you've presented a balanced budget for 23-24, but not for the future years. So expecting that more of the reserves will need to be used. Is this a sustainable use of the reserves?
Well, 17.4 million of the financial risk reserve is associated with spend that's been required to support the improvement programme in children's. We haven't had a choice in that.
Okay.
And what we're having to do, I mean, what we've done in terms of building the coming year's requirement for the improvement plan into the base budget for children's is actually putting it in there, saying that element of the improvement plan is what is expected to be the ongoing cost of the improvement plan in terms of how children's needs to be funded in order to deliver its services differently. We've got 7.9 million from reserves, which are the remaining COVID grant balances that we have chosen to use to fund work in the community and to support business, to bump start the economy in the county. We had a choice over how we did that, but we felt the right thing to do was to spend that money as quickly as possible, supporting households that were in difficulty and helping to get the economy going again in the county. And it wasn't appropriate for us to hang on to that money. The right thing to do was to get it out there and get it doing some good in the Herefordshire sort of economy and business community. And the other movements are only about 3.4 million in total, and are associated with all sorts of things, including investment in schools maintenance and improvements.
Chair, I think we'll look maybe at a recommendation perhaps along the lines, or at least some sort of flag to say that this sort of drawdown of reserves is posing a risk to the MTEFS in the future. Maybe something we can discuss as a group afterwards.
Okay, if you can maybe draft some words that you might like to propose.
Okay.
Because I've just
conscious of time.
33%. If I'm looking at the movement, it's about 33%. So a third, at least a third of reserves in this year. Looking at Appendix E, and maybe with your concerns, maybe there needs to be greater visibility to members around the use of reserves. Maybe that might be if you can have a think about that and propose. Do I have other questions from members around the use of reserves? Councillor Swinglehurst?
Yeah, I'm just sort of picking up on this. So I'm hoping that this will be helpful. So till later on in the agenda, the council's financial strategy will seek to minimise the use of reserves in the medium term and to replenish them to support future sustainability and enable the council to respond to unexpected changes, etc., etc. But we have in the short term the £6 million shortfall is going to be funded from reserves. I think probably some more clarity or detail, some sense of where the replenishment is going to come from in order to enable the future sustainability that the council has the ambition to achieve. I think that might be helpful because at the moment it doesn't attach to anything real. Because I look at the MTFS and all I can think is that shortfall is going to be funded from reserves. So how do we build up reserves if we keep using them?
Councillor Harvey, did you want to respond to that?
Well, this is a particularly lean year. We're very pleased to be able to put a budget forward that isn't requiring a gap to be closed by use of reserves in order to balance the budget, which was the position that we feared we might be in earlier on in the autumn when we were unclear as to what the financial settlement was going to end up being. But we've closed that gap with the management of pressures and with a savings programme that means that we're not relying on any use of reserves in terms of presenting a balanced budget to council, which is really good news compared to where we were in the autumn.
But we are using reserves to fund the waste.
But that is an earmarked reserve for waste. So that we're always expecting to have to renegotiate the waste contract at this point in the contractual cycle, and earmarked reserves were set aside in order to be able to do that, as they would be for the retendering of other large contracts, and the cost of doing that, both in sort of external support and also in officer time.
But there's an ambition to replenish the reserves. So that sort of looking.
Yes, I mean as when the funds are available, that's what we do, and that's how the reserves get built up. And at the moment, because of the gap, if you like, between the financial settlement and even the levels of inflation that we're dealing with, this is a particularly lean year. In addition to that, we've got the pressures that we have this year associated with funding an improvement plan in children's, which is simply not an option not to do. So reserves are for rainy days, and this year it's been raining.
I think Councillor Hitchner, did you want to comment on that, and then I'll go to Councillor Shaw.
Yes, a couple of things really. I think when we have put forward proposals to spend additional money in children's, we have identified where that money is coming from, and that has been saying it's coming from reserves. So there hasn't been any hiding of where the money has come from. Whether people have understood what we put in our reports might be another matter. Yes, we could try to build up reserves again this year, but we'd have to have further cuts. in order to have a balanced budget. So this year is just not an option. And so we, in common with so many local authorities around the country, they are having to draw on their reserves. Reserves have gone down. The government seems to think that these reserves can be spent, and they seem to have had a policy of actually making sure that councils do start spending money out of reserves. I think there's been pressure from organisations within the local authority to question that, because there are some authorities which have huge reserves in the hundreds of percents, whereas we don't, and we're kind of in the middle of the pack, as I understand it, and there are other authorities which are in much more difficulty because they don't have reserves. So longer term, yes, let's hope that we can build up those reserves once again, but there's no promise. We would have to be drawing surplus of some sort in order to replenish those reserves. Very nice to have, but really central government don't look particularly sympathetically on us holding reserves.
Thank you. I have Councillor Shaw and then Councillor Lester.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I just wanted to clarify something that's confused in my mind. I think the Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting requires there to be a distinction between provisions and reserves. Is the waste or reserve in this instance actually a provision? In fact, do we talk about earmark reserves, whereas we should be talking about provisions, or are provisions specified elsewhere?
Andrew Ludgrove.
Thank you, Chair. There's a live debate within the accountancy world about reserve versus provision, so it's something that we're waiting for SIPRA to give further guidance on. I'm comfortable that the way to preserve, we've been putting money aside for a number of years in preparation for re-tendering this contract and all the changes. I'm very comfortable that's reserve. One of the things we've undertaken with Grant Thornton, our excellent auditors, is to have that review, provide that clarity whether it's a reserve or a provision. That doesn't change the amount of money, it just changes how it's presented. We do have other accountancy provisions within our balance sheet, which are treated as accounting provisions and aren't on this list.
Yeah, so the accounting provisions aren't disclosed on the budget because they're not part of it, they're disclosed in the annual chart. I think the confusion is that if you're not aware of the difference between the treatment of a provision and the treatment of a reserve, then the distinction of an earmark reserve doesn't necessarily give the impression that it ought to in terms of this situation. And in terms of the provision of future reserves, we still have, and I believe a paper came to this committee a week ago about the new treatment of the MRP. And perhaps you could just refresh our minds as to how much MRP will come into reserves in the coming year.
I need to check the exact number, but I think it's about 1.5 million to 2 million. There is a sliding scale, so I'd have to double check before I could.
So that will help to replenish
the financial reserves.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Lester, and then we'll move on to the last element of the capital budget.
Thank you, Chair. A question for Councillor Harvey. I note the point that you make about this proposed budget is a proposal that doesn't have to draw on reserves. That's in contrast to, I think, on page 283, it's saying that the expected forecast overspend for 22-23 will be met by using council reserves of £6 million. In order to balance this proposed budget, it's predicated largely on making savings. And in the past, those savings have been very hard to achieve for various reasons that we all know. Could I ask what makes Councillor Harvey confident that this proposal will make those savings to balance the budget so that reserves won't be an option like they are in this financial year? Thank you.
I wouldn't wish to confuse in members' minds or in the minds of the public, the savings programme that is signed up to and is part of the budget that our directorates have been delivering on all year, and an unexpected, budgeted for overspend, which is what the 6 million in the Children's Directorate represents. All of our budgets have had agreed savings programmes come forward as part of them, and those are then delivered through the financial year and are reported on through the quarterly performance reports. And there is a section of the quarterly performance report which shows red, amber, green where the savings programmes are in terms of their delivery according to their plans. So that's part of any budget that has been being produced during the period of austerity that's been going on for over a decade now, in terms of reducing funding to support local government. So that's just part of how the budgets have been being put forward for a long time, and this budget for 2023-24 is no different in that respect. My confidence in terms of the savings programme as proposed being deliverable and delivered is based on the assurances received from our directors and collectively from the leadership team that have agreed and put forward these savings programmes after an awful lot of debate and careful consideration.
I guess on that point, Councillor Harvey, I know some of the savings when we get onto the revenue budget are substantial and are larger than the some of the capital items that have a load of business cases to support them. So is there any further assurances? We get business cases for capital items that need to be approved in terms of assurances around the savings. Is there any detail behind, not necessarily a business case, but something similar to demonstrate the robustness behind the savings proposals?
My understanding is that they've been gone into in some detail within the directorates and within the leadership team in terms of making sure that there is confidence that the savings are capable of being delivered and that there are plans to deliver them. They don't have formal business cases in the same way that the capital programme proposals do, but they do form part of the overall business programme within each directorate and are often linked to transformation programmes and other sorts of investments that are ongoing in order to help us deliver our services in new ways, just to keep them going.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I'm conscious that we are now halfway through our allocated time. So if I think we've got one further area around capital, which is in relation to any project-specific questions. If we can take any last few questions from all members to cover the capital budget so we can move on to revenue in the next 10-15 minutes, I'd appreciate it. So we have Councillor Howes, and then if there are any other general questions that people would like to ask.
Yes, thank you. It was a question on reserves. But on the point that Councillor Shaw raised in MRP, we did agree last week to support a different model of calculating MRP, which I assume hasn't been done yet, so the figure won't be certain, but a more favourable model to the council, which was an interesting discussion. On reserves, I just want to clarify something. I don't think I've missed it, but in Appendix E, it shows our reserves have gone down from 21 to now in 2 years by something like 35,000 to 77,000. And that's at the end of March this year. Am I right in thinking that because of the increased settlement granting, not digging into reserves this year, we can expect the expected balance in March 2024 to be quite similar to what it is now? And the second question is, what do we think, given that we're very prudent, would be a figure of reserves that we should not go below in order to be putting risk on those reserves not being adequate for purposes being met?
Well, I think certainly that latter question, I think it should be directed to Andrew Lovegrove.
Yes, I think so, yes, please.
Chair, in terms of the reserves balances, and the general reserve number at the top is 9.6, that's one I'm actually required to comment on. I'm very comfortable with 9.6. The earmarked reserves, and that's very much I think a question for Cabinet, but I will draw people's attention to a number of those are other factors. So we've got in there COVID grants, so that has a distorting effect, because as you can see that is reducing because we are spending the COVID grants going through, and one of these things will rely upon people giving us grants, which we hold till we've met the arrangements. So in terms of the question, is that the reserves levels adequate? Yes, I'm very confident they are. In terms of whether the earmarked reserves levels are where they should be, I think that's a conversation with Cabinet about how they spend the money, but also we have to recognise that it's dependent on how other people give us money to spend on behalf of either government or other agencies.
So just to clarify, there isn't a figure which you'd say that you'd be uncomfortable as the Section 151 officer below which our reserves went that you would be uncomfortable with?
Okay, that's the 9.6 million for the general reserve. So that's the figure that I have to comment on, and that's part of my Section 25 report to full council, which will generate on the 10th February. So that's the figure I am very comfortable with and have to give an opinion on. As I said, the earmarked reserves, that's very much a question for Cabinet as to how they want to spend those monies.
Okay, so can I ask the Cabinet member then what her view would be on what the minimum figure of reserves ought to be for prudent financing? Thank you.
Well, statutorily, the general reserve, it requires that we have a general reserve, which is the 9.6 million, that sits somewhere between 3 and 5% of our net revenue. And at a level of 9.6 million, it is at the top end of that, it's at 5%. So it's at the top end of what statutorily we're required to hold in a general reserve. The earmarked reserves are a reflection of the things, just as if you were saving up for a holiday and for maybe a new car and for, other things at home. The earmarked reserves are the monies that we put aside anticipating future costs, like retendering of large contracts, as you've heard, for waste. And then we get grants come in for things like school improvements and maintenance and that sort of thing. And we have to hold those in earmarked reserves because we're not allowed to spend them on anything we like. They have to be spent on very specific things. And as I've said, we're really keen to get the COVID grant money out the door and having a positive impact out in the community rather than us hanging on to it. So we've made a clear decision that we want to see that money used, wisely and well, but out there helping to Herefordshire to recover from COVID in all the various different ways in which it needs to do that. The other reserves that we've got earmarked that you can see in the detailed papers that the committee's been provided with are making provisions for other things that we can see needing to happen, as well as the known unknowns in terms of the financial resilience reserve, where we have funds for the inevitably unexpected events.
Thank you, Councillor
Very
Harry.
helpful answer, thank you. I think it would help people listening. Thanks a lot.
Councillor Stark.
Yes, it is on item 4, Chair, but it's a general question on item 4 rather than a project-specific question. We're a small county. Councillor Harvey said we're a rural county. We don't have a huge tax base, but we have quite a big capital programme, and we have quite a good deal of ambition on transformation of service delivery. I just wonder whether, and I'm looking at Councillor Harrington here as well as others, whether we considered trying to get economies of scale as a council through combining with other local authorities some of the capital work that we're planning to do. or even combining some of the back office transformation we're trying to do. For example, I know the fire authority and police do some back office services together, and I just wondered whether, by just containing all of this within Herefordshire, given that we just don't have the muscle power here when it comes to contracts and everything else, whether we should be thinking about, could we combine with Worcestershire in terms of our public realm? Could we combine with other authorities in terms of some of our back office functions in corporate areas? I just wonder whether this is a time when we've got these challenges before us, whether we do start thinking about transformation along those lines.
I think Councillor Davis and perhaps Councillor Harrington, if maybe you two can briefly respond, that would be great.
Yeah, so I'll take a couple of those. So, for example, just to give you a working example of where we do that, there's something called the One Herefordshire Public Estate, and that's where we work with the police, the fire authority, the NHS, to achieve that economies of scale. So if we're looking at investing in a certain area, do they want to come on board with us and invest at that same point? So actually, for me, it's not just about those economies of scales, it's actually about providing services in the same area. So if that one-stop shop that we all talk about, which means that we don't have residents having to go all over the place and they can just go to one centralised point. Another example of that is heating systems. So looking at, could we have our own heat system that would supply the hospital and supply our council buildings? That's another economies of scale. So from my experience with officers, that is absolutely something that they look at when we're looking at any type of contract. The waste contract, which is coming to scrutiny on Thursday, is another example for the future when we're looking at how we dispose of our waste. I've said nothing's off the table with that. You know, there will be authorities that maybe we aren't neighbouring with, but still maybe share our ambition for what we want to do in the future. And I've made that very clear to our consultants that are working with us to look at that plan. So for me, absolutely, every single design that we do, we try and engage with partners to see if that can be achieved.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Harrington, any comments?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Stark. It's a good question. I think the issues we've got are structural at the moment. So I know you're probably talking capital rather than necessarily revenue, but even for capital, the issue we've got is that the model of contract that we've got with our public realm contractor that was begun in 2013 means that we don't have a lot of staff at a technical level within the council. So in a sense, we've outsourced that capacity to do that kind of cross-border thinking or talking, or, you know, the sort of suggestions you're making. The flip side to that is that the public realm contractors, the major civils companies that bid for public realm work, they come with that offer. They tell us that that's their kind of USB, you know, that they can actually get their staff from all over the county, that they, you know, from all over the country, that they could work with their other depots and get better quality and cheaper prices and things like this. So it's a bit complicated at the moment, but because we're looking at that model and how we would build back up our technical services, I think that's something that would be more possible, and I think it's a very good thing to consider. And also for us to think about potentially selling some of our skills if we start to do things that other authorities don't do. But it comes back to that capacity and where we found ourselves, but we are building ourselves back into a position to be able to do something like that.
And would it be positive for all of you for us to make a recommendation along those lines to actually focus on it? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. Do I have any further questions on the capital budget before we summarise our debate and recommend any potential recommendations? Okay, so I look to the clerk, please, if you could just remind us of some of the recommendations that people raised.
Okay. So far, I think I've captured three principal recommendations. There was the recommendation from Councillor Fagan. The Cabinet maintain momentum on capital projects. The committee supports the approach to pull more capital projects forward into 23-24, making use of the Project Management Office to ensure delivery stays on track with a view to reducing future increases in cost.
Any comments on that recommendation?
I think there was a concern that was raised by Councillor Stark about capacity.
Yeah.
You know, and do you actually just set up to fail by bringing too many projects forward when, you know, I'm assuming that we're already doing what we can do?
Well, the capital programme as proposed is intending to use the borrowing limit for this financial year and a portion of the borrowing limit for next year in order to commence delivery of the entirety of the programme. So the new projects plus the ones that we've already got in the programme that carry on into 23-24.
So is the committee's position not to, should I maybe see a show of hands as to those that might support this recommendation?
To move progress, shall I propose we accept the recommendation? Nobody's proposed it yet, I don't think, up there on the floor.
No. So would can I see a show of hands for those that?
I mean, maybe can we just put something along the lines of where practicable or where
that's what I was going to suggest.
Where capacity,
because
it looks like a full plate to me.
I'm just wondering whether Councillor Fagin's proposal is actually supporting what we're proposing to do, which is to pull that money forward rather than to do more of it.
I think I suggested this right in the beginning, so.
It would be a supportive.
So the Scrutiny Management Board supports the approach to pull more capital projects forward into 23-24.
Yeah. Fine.
Well, it's really the funding of those through the borrowing mechanism.
Pull more capital, pull more funding forwards.
On the assurance that project management experience will be there to develop expertise, because that's what we've been assured on the assurance of the project management.
Would that include a business case for each project? I don't know.
Well, we have business cases for each of the projects.
Yeah, we have business cases already, but they need to be gone through to make sure.
You can't borrow capital unless you've got a business case.
No.
And that's gone through before council, so that's it. What happens if the project management team excels itself, the council excels itself and actually exceeds delivery of projects such that the borrowing requirement then exceeds the ceiling? Are you allowed to? You're at the moment borrowing forward on the basis that within the year you won't exceed the ceiling on capital. There is a ceiling on capital borrowing for the council. And at the moment we never reach the ceiling because we're always at 60% or 50% of what we deliver. If we bring so many of the projects forward, is there a danger that you'll be exceeding the ceiling in year by spending on the future year's projects? That's a potential if you expanded your team, isn't it? But I'm just trying to understand whether there's any realistic chance of you getting to that figure, and if you do, what do you do about it?
Chair, let's see if I can answer that question. So the question is, so say the projects excel themselves and they get to actually spending in advance of what we're predicting here. So are we going to breach that ceiling? Well, at the moment we are internally borrowed, and this committee's seen the reports from Link, our Treasury advisors. So we are comfortably under borrowed and in fact lending the money to ourselves. So from a technical point of view, if we got to that scenario where we temporarily got ahead of ourselves and spent ahead of that ceiling, we would in fact lend ourselves the money temporarily to do that transaction. So that would be the mechanism. I think it's a fair question. Can we, at this point, predict that we're going to get ahead of that ceiling? I don't think we can at that point. That's not what the business cases are suggesting, but I think the recommendation you're making is, could we look at accelerating that? And I think that will be part of that process of looking at each one of the sort of our business case to address that funding issue.
Well, I think the wording that we've got so far is that the SMB supports the approach to pull more funding forward for capital projects, with assurances given on the increased capacity to deliver through the PMO into 23-24. Does that sound, Councillor Fagan?
That's fine,
Yes.
With the revised wording, are you comfortable with that?
Sorry, can you just,
And Councillor Howells for putting the recommendation forward.
could you just repeat the revised wording? Sorry.
We might ask the clerk to put on screen, if that's okay.
Spoiler alert, I've got the other recommendation.
So SMB supports the approach to pull more funding forward for capital projects with the assurances given of the increased capacity to deliver through the PMO into 23-24.
Yeah.
So we're supporting what's in the business case. Can I see a show of hands on those that particular recommendation, please? Those in support? I think that's unanimous in the room. Thank you. So moving on to the next one, please, Claire.
So a further recommendation was suggested around reserves. The wording as provided is, with the significant drop in reserves in 22-23 of some 32%, the committee would like greater transparency on the Cabinet approach to the use of reserves and the level to be kept, and what this means for future sustainability and credibility of the MTFS.
Everyone comfortable with the wording? May I see Councillor Shaw?
Yeah, when Cabinet establishes reserves, there is meant to be a statement made as to what the reserve is for. I think it would be useful in terms of policy, and I haven't looked at the policy, if there is a list against those names of reserves as to why Cabinet established a reserve and what it's for. Especially the MRP reserve. Thank you.
Councillor Watson?
Or the financial
yes.
resilience reserve, sorry.
Yeah, I was just quickly Googling about reserve policies, and it's quite clear within the Charities Commission about what the government puts down for charities, but within the local government association. And I propose that actually we could do with a really robust reserves policy that actually outlines all these key points, please.
It's a separate recommendation.
Is that a second recommendation as well?
I think so, yeah, it's a
yeah.
separate one. Mine's a practical one, yeah.
It goes a bit further from the.
Mine's a practical, yeah.
I think the clerk's just recommending that we take a short adjournment, so we can get the wording of the recommendations right, and then we can come back, approve it, and then move on.
Timing constraint, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to remind Chair that the majority of Cabinet members, I think pretty well all of us, have got meetings at 5 o'clock to go to, so we're not able to extend the time on this. It does need to keep to time.
Okay, so then perhaps we just need to wordsmith it on screen whilst we do it quickly then. So with the significant drop in reserves, we'd like greater transparency on the Cabinet approach to use of reserves and the level to be kept. Are we happy with that? Plus an additional recommendation that we want a more robust reserves policy supporting the budget.
I think the wording isn't strong enough. I think it should say, instead of the Cabinet would like greater transparency, recommends that the Cabinet provides greater transparency.
Fine,
Yeah.
fine.
Okay.
You're being hard today, Philip. It's usually me. I'm a pussycat today. Yeah. I saw that. I'm not being tough enough, you Phyllis. What's wrong with me?
So you're comfortable with the wording on paragraph bullet point 2?
Yep, okay.
And we put in a recommendation that we would like a more robust reserves policy supporting the budget.
Yes.
Go on to the next page, please.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Harvey wants to say something too.
Can I just clarify whether you're wanting us to magic up a policy before this budget comes to full council, or whether you're saying that in time for the 24-25 budget, that a policy is developed.
I think timeline, we have to say for keepers.
I think we do, yes. Yeah.
That's all to do.
I know.
Good point.
No, I think they've read that, so they're fine with that next one.
Yes, so.
So there was a recommendation partially formed around exploring the capacity of the council to try and build more economies of scale. So what I've got so far is through transformation and service delivery to seek and build the capacity, so I haven't quite got there, to build economies of scale by considering combining some services, both internal and contracted out, notably back office and maintenance of the public realm with another neighbouring authority.
Or we could just say partners, maybe best say partners after what Councillor Davis said, rather than just being Pacific, yes.
Can everyone see that on screen? Comfortable with that wording?
Yeah.
Next one.
I don't think we've had any more recommendations.
So they're the 4 recommendations. Do we have any further recommendations that we don't?
Yes, I made one on the Treasury Management Strategy.
And can you repeat what?
Yeah, that we should review the Treasury Management Strategy to consider.
So that was similar to the recommendation that we made last week.
Right, I'm asking, so I thought, has that already been done then? So we don't need to do it again?
So that we made a recommendation on that last week.
Okay, right, just checking, I'm happy with that if we think
We've captured that one.
secure, fine.
And the wording was agreed at committee.
It was, great.
Any other recommendations? Right, so you've seen them all on screen. Can I see please show of hands on those in the room that support those recommendations? I think that's unanimous, so thank you very much.
That's comfortable.
Capital, but we did cover a number of things in the revenue budget as well at the same time. So moving on to agenda item 8. I think we've had the introduction, so I think if everyone is willing, we'll just jump back into the questions. I think the key lines of inquiry that the committee identified around the revenue budget includes, once again, robustness of information, questions around the medium financial term strategy and the robustness of the estimates contained within that, and some questions around base budgets. So start, if we're happy to proceed in that order. We did have some questions around savings, but I believe we covered those off when we talked about when we were on the capital agenda. So if I can invite members for questions around the robustness of information, please. Will you, Councillor Watson, can you kick us off?
Yes, straight off the start line. In terms of public understanding, on page 266 on the proposed 23-24 budget, could someone explain to me central, please? What does central mean on the table?
I think page 267, is it on the net budget requirements? Yeah. Central. Yeah, on 266 and 267. I think, is that a technical question by Mr. Andy Lovegrove, potentially? So you'll find it just under, you've got the detail of the directorate, the subtotal, and then you've got central line, and then you've got totals. Page 266.
It's the criteria in the chart, Andrew, and it's got specifically central, so it's got corporate, community, and then says central.
So, Chair, I apologise, I've now found the page. So central are the central costs that we incur, so it's the cost of borrowing, the employer's pension costs, so that's part of how the council does its business. So we keep those costs in the central area rather than trying to allocate them across other parts of the council.
So does that include overheads or things like Hoopal, project management office, things like that, or is that purely specific?
Purely central, so it's the cost of finance, the cost of things like
finance.
pension.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions from members? Councillor Shaw.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I presume this is probably the right time to ask the question. I just wanted to go to page 280 and page 319 as well, the chart, or the slide, which amplifies some of the assumptions made in putting the budget and the MTPF together. I know Councillor Hitchener, we touched on inflation earlier on. I'm just trying to understand the assumptions which have been made and the basis of the assumptions relating to inflation. I suppose I'm looking for a narrative on which these assumptions are based. Both the OBR and the Bank of England recently in December forecast inflation to be 4% by the end of 2023 and below 2% towards the middle of 2024. And yet we've got inflation figures here, which certainly in the MTPF sort of at 8% and 4% going out beyond contractual inflation at quite a high rate. To my mind, there's a danger of over-egging this particular pudding and overinflating the figures in the MTPF to that extent. So I've no objection to using the figures you're using, providing there's some sort of assumption, some sort of authoritative basis on which those inflationary figures have been created. So I did put together a short recommendation. I appreciate you may want to reply first. But I have a recommendation, Chair, should that reply fall short of my expectations.
Was it a technical question that you wanted Councillor Andrew?
No, well, I think Councillor Harvey, by all means, able to answer
it first before.
But it's really just to understand the basis of the assumptions.
Yeah, well, you know, from my point of view, it's once bitten, twice shy. When we were putting the budget together this time last year, the sort of forecasts of what inflation was going to look like by now were saying, 7%, 8% maybe. Well, that's not how that turned out. So, I think we listen to the advice that we're given, and you can see as far as the out years are concerned in the MTFS, we've got a 5% figure there, but maybe we're not quite as bullish as Bank of England or some may be as to quite how quickly that inflation is going to drop off. And of course, national inflation and CPI don't necessarily reflect where inflation hits us as a council in terms of the kind of services that we deliver and that we procure through others. So it isn't necessarily the case that we experience the same sort of inflation that households do when it comes to the services we deliver. And now I'll pass to Mr. Lovegrove.
Thank you, Joe. As Councillor Harvey said, we have to take a view going forward, and that's what Cabinet have done, looking at those assumptions. And we have to set a balanced budget for next year, the 23-24 budget. The latter years in the MTFS don't have to balance, but it has to be a clear process of going through. So in terms of the assumptions for inflation, they're prudent, they're making a reasonable assumption about it. At the moment, nobody knows what they're going to be. There are some experts that are predicting a little bit of deflation. Others are predicting that actually this is the start of a further inflationary cycle. So it's quite difficult to predict the future. But I'm confident that the assumptions that Cabinet used are reasonable and fair. If the viewers are slightly prudent, well, I think let's recognise.
Chair, if I just come back, a 4% difference on inflation on a £200 million budget, £8 million. that makes quite a splash in terms of the overall balancing of the budget. I just feel that there could be more work done, and I appreciate Councillor Harvey's comment on different types of inflation. And I haven't looked at forecast construction inflation costs, other costs which might be prudent to look at. I just think if we're putting together this budget and the sensitivity to inflation increases is so considerable, it would be worth spending a little more, investing a little more time in considering what other indices are published, are forecast by the construction bodies, for instance.
So, Councillor Shaw, are we leaning towards maybe more sensitivity analysis and understanding if they use different rates, what would the effect be on budget? So, would a recommendation
that could be the result to sensitivity analysis.
So that might be a question then to Councillor Harvey. I mean, what sensitivity analysis has been undertaken, and is that something that potentially can be shared with the committee, or a summary of, just so we can better understand, I guess, the best and worst case scenarios on some of these assumptions?
These figures were just built into the modelling of the pressures that we were likely to incur against the different directorates. So there was some work done to try and understand what the likely impact was going to be of demand pressures and what uplift in percentage terms we would expect as a consequence of both contracts where we spot purchase and also contracts where, you know, we're bought into particular rates at the moment, where at the moment our suppliers are carrying the burden of inflation within their own pricing structures that they've already agreed with us, but we can see those contracts coming up for renegotiation.
So sorry, I'm conscious that we're short on time. So have you performed sensitivity analysis?
This is in the directorates, their judgments have been made looking at the contracts, looking at how we buy and deliver services, and these are the figures that we've come out with, taking into account what the experts are saying more generally about inflation in the national economy.
So, Councillor Stark or Councillor Shaw, does that impact?
It's not, there weren't sensitivity analyses done on, you know, how risky our judgment of 8% is, say, for next year, on, you know, whether we get it right or wrong. But this is the synthesis of the judgment that have been made within the service areas about what the likely impacts of inflation will be across the business.
Well, if you take the MTFS, which is just one line assumption, I would have thought you would go for a best and worst case scenario analysis. I mean, I have thought as usual that where the future is so uncertain, where the volatility in the economic context is so uncertain, that we wouldn't just be presented with that one line of figures based on one set of assumptions. There would be some sort of sensitivity analysis where you say, this could be the best outcome for us, but this could be the worst outcome for us. I don't know why we don't do that.
Well, what we're doing is presenting you, following those discussions, if you like, and judgments, with what we consider to be the balanced budget for the coming year, taking what we believe to be the most appropriate figure into account. Pass to Mr. Lovegrove.
Thank you. So the medium-term financial strategy in front of you, page 285, I think it is, because it doesn't balance for the latter 3 years. And I think is the point that Councillor Shaw was making, that there is an element of the impact of that inflation. So, and the other bit of the equation that we don't have is what the government will do in terms of future funding arrangements. So we know that the settlement that came out was very late this year, again, just before Christmas, and that had quite a new funding stream, which I think the Council recognises is very helpful. It makes it quite difficult to forward project over years 2, 3 and 4 without those key bits of the information being provided. So what we've got here is the best estimate of the arrangements. A lot of the contracts that we have, will have a clause about inflation. The only bit that is when that is taken, and each contract will be different. Most of our expenditure is linked into like big contracts, some of those are spot funded. So what you're seeing in front of you is very much, you could call it the worst case scenario based on the information we've got today, which is probably where we need to be, planning for the worst, hope for the best in terms of those years 2, 3, 4. And clearly there will be another process for setting next year's budget. This committee will have the opportunity to debate close each other 24-25 budget. And hopefully at that point government will be a little bit clearer about the future funding arrangements for local government. But I think we all recognise there's a lot of volatility in the local government environment, certainly around how care is funded or not funded in the future, all those type of things, what support government will and won't provide for local authorities.
So if I can round back to you, Councillor Scrutiny, with your initial question. And potential recommendations.
Yeah, I think we're back to some round figure inflation figures which are sort of plucked pretty much out of the air based on what it is at the moment, where it might be going in the future, rather than looking at any authoritative data from construction industry bodies or any industry bodies. And I just think that it would be good to have a look at what other data is available. If we stick with these figures and inflation comes out lower, do we expect to see an underspend in each department as a result of that? That's probably the where I'm getting to. Because if it has been an experience that if you create a budget, the department will spend it. So if you create the budget at 8% inflation and it's only 4% inflation, they will spend what you give them with 8% inflation. So I'm just conscious of creating inflated budgets.
Well, you're talking hypothetical maths, of course. I object to you suggesting that we've plucked figures from the air. These are judgment calls that are made by people who are experienced delivering these services and understand the contracts underpinning them and the service pressures that each area is facing. If you look on page 286 in terms of the estimates for future years in the NTFS, you can see there are very different, it's not as if there's an algorithm that's been applied across all lines similarly. There are very different profiles for those numbers on each one of those lines. For example, we're not making an assumption that we're going to be getting anything additional from the Rural Sparsity Delivery Grant. It's going to stay at the cash level that it's at, which effectively means that it decreases in terms of its buying power across the period. Whereas we are hopeful in our expectation that all of the talk that there is in government about reforming the funding of social care will actually rattle through eventually when everybody's brave enough to actually grasp the nettle. In terms of there being an increase in social care support grant funding that comes through to us one way or another, yet to be determined. And you can see on the business rates and the other lines what assumptions have been put in there. If it turns out differently, which inevitably it will, because it always does, if it turns out in our favour, that would be a nice problem to have. But we're not putting a budget together which is assuming that everything in the garden's going to be rosy, because, we're stinging, if you like, as a consequence of the circumstances that have developed over just this year. And who would have thought that, this time last year, we would be where we are now in terms of the national economy and its impact on, you know, everybody's lives, let alone local government and its.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. So can we maybe conclude, can we form a conclusion on this point? How would we like to take this forward?
Well, I don't think we have an agreement here. I mean, I'm looking at the table on page 319, which has, for instance, contact Act indexation, E&E, 8% for 23-24, 8% for 24-25, 8% for 25-26, 8% for 26-27. I don't think any, in-depth thought has gone into that 8% as it's been spread across those years. So I appreciate Councillor Harvey's robust defence that those figures are the most detailed and well thought out that the department cannot come up with. But I do challenge that perhaps if I could see the assumptions and the evidence on which they're based, I could we'd be happy with accepting them, and council could be happy with accepting them with better confidence.
I guess the aim of our committee is to gain that assurance. So is one of your recommendations then that to gain further information, Councillor Shaw?
Yeah, that the narrative be provided to justify the inflation figures used for the budget in the MTFS.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. So a narrative be provided to. Can you repeat that, please? A narrative be provided.
Sorry, that a narrative be provided to justify the inflation figures used for the budget in the MTFS.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. So if I can move on to other questions, Councillor House.
Yeah, I had similar two questions, one on robustness and one on meeting objectives. I'm pleased to hear that Councillor Harvey talked about the social care support grant, which is nearly double. And that presumably is because we're pretty sure.
Yeah. Yes, Councillor House.
Sorry, yes, I wasn't sure Councillor Harvey was listening. My question, which probably addresses to you. You made the point about the social support grant.
Turn your microphone on. I don't think I can hear you very well.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had to turn it on. Yeah, and the robustness of the budget, the social care support grant. You did talk about that, and it's nearly double. I wasn't sure if you were saying you were pretty confident about getting that or not, so I'd like a bit more clarification. I'm not sure what market sustainability and fair cost of care is, and that's going to go up by 4 times. So it'd be good to know a bit more why that's in there and how robust that is. And the new homes bonus, given some problems with developing, I'm not quite sure what that is. It's a small chunk, but those are the 3 areas particularly. I'd ask for some robust clarification. I think that quite supports the recommendation that we've just had.
Is it to one of the cabinet members?
Yeah, I think that's probably the question for Councillor Harvey. But my second question, which I can ask now or later, it's on objectives. Looking at the chart on the net budget requirements by directorate, I mean, clearly the adult and children's services are going up inexorably. And when I look at the corporate and the central, they have actually gone up somewhat, proposed in the new year, which are what you might call service type costs and not necessarily productive of improving the grey bit, which is the economy and environment. Both of those pretty important areas for them, but they look like a pretty flat budget. It looks like it has been for 3 years. But given our commitment to climate change and all the changes we have to make for that, and investing in our economy, given the pressures on it and lack of support outside, do we really think that maintaining a relatively flat budget on economy and environment is actually going to achieve objectives? Are we having to make necessary compromises because of pressures in other areas?
2 quite detailed questions there, Councillor Harvey. The first one, I think, was around clarification over 3.
Robustness, and yes, in particular, just a bit more in-depth knowledge on the social care support grant. It's doubling. And the market sustainability and fair cost of care grant, which is quadrupling, and what the new homes bonus figure is, and is that, are all those 3 robust and sustainable, and what do they actually mean, please?
Well, these figures have come from directorate understanding of what the likely grant streams will be or will need to be to align with statements that have been made by government about reform of social care and the route by which social care will be funded. Now, again, this is a 4-year MTFS, so all we can do is project forward based on what it is we're being told by government will be the approach they're taking to funding social care and reforming of that funding. That's already slid to the right, and we're hoping that it won't slide further. But this is the judgment of the service area in terms of what our expectation is based on statements by government that we will be looking to receive in order to fund the service, at least to the extent that it is funded through government grants. Obviously, of course, service recipients also contribute to the care costs that they receive, and that's an income stream that is also taken account of in the budget.
Yeah, so it is a critical part of our delivering our improvement plan, for example, and it does look like there is some question about robustness, which understandable reasons, but it has to be a bit of a worry. And the other two areas asked about, market sustainability and the new homes bonus.
The new homes bonus, government played some tunes with it this time in terms of changing the rules a bit in how it calculated it in the settlement that we were notified of just before Christmas, and they changed the way they did the calculation to net off any empty properties that they were notified of within the area, which significantly reduced the net figure for the increase in homes that were available in the county compared to the gross figure, because there were a significant number of homes that were identified as being vacant at the moment in time when the numbers were sort of set for the calculation. So what we're doing is not sort of counting our chickens on that one. If we get a different calculation come forward from central government next year on how they want to do the new homes bonus and it's more in our favour, then we'll have a bit more money than we had this year. But what we're not doing is sort of over-egging it in terms of assuming what we will get based on the, again, slightly bitter experience this year. I mean, we had 1.3 million last year from the new homes bonus because we are delivering despite difficulties in the due to the condition of the rivers. On bringing development forward, we are still delivering a significant number of new homes and exceeding on our target for affordable housing in the county, which is another good news story. But we don't want to assume that money is going to come in because obviously you would challenge us as a committee as to whether, based on this year's figure, it was realistic to assume that we were going to get over £1 million next year on new homes bonus. So we're not doing that. And similarly, as far as the market sustainability and fair cost of care is concerned, that only extends for another year beyond this year, and then that stops. And that's why there is a significant jump in the social care support grant line, because it's wrapped into that and the other social care reforms, if I understand it correctly. Yes, nods from the people who know.
I understand that. On the other question about achieving objectives for the economy and the environment, perhaps we could ask the department head your thoughts about how we can meet our objectives when it looks like a flat budget.
Thank
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, Councillor Jones would have responded to your question, Councillor. But I mean, I think that the key part for us is to understand the work that we are doing at the moment. As you know, we're bringing forward a new economic plan that's been developed in partnership with all the key partners across the county, and the nature of that is to think more around those partnership workings, and it's whilst we play a key part in being that sort of connector across the different businesses and the different communities. Our role really then to make sure that the other partners can come forward and deliver what they need to do. So we haven't put forward at this point any growth requests within the directorate. We put for economic development. We're keen to sort of maintain the level that we've got and stand in the bigger picture that the council's got in terms of its budget setting. Once the economic plan has been adopted, then clearly we'll be going back at different times and reshaping the way that we provide those services. But at the moment, the numbers that we've got, looking at some of the grant funding that's coming in, things like the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, it's using that grant money to deliver some of those services rather than sort of focusing on our base budgets.
And in meeting our environmental objectives and things like climate change.
Yeah, I mean the same.
We're going to be able to maintain our objectives of increasing our or reducing our emissions and down to our objectives net zero. Yeah, we think the budget's adequate to keep making those objectives.
Again, I mean, we'd always like more money for these things, but I mean, the focus, and it was one of the other questions I think Councillor Swinglehurst was asking around the use of sort of some of the grant money for things like the hub and our retrofit programme. You know, it is about seeing those opportunities coming forward. We naturally, we don't have the money to invest in all of those programmes. The other thing that we are looking to do is actually just redraft some of the climate actions so that it's clear how they sit across the whole organisation, because we're delivering far more across each directorate and across each portfolio than is clear at the moment. So I think just even presenting that in a different way to you, you'll be able to see that investing what we've got, we are delivering quite a lot already.
Okay,
thank you. Can I move on?
Okay, thank you. Just a very basic question. I've got 3 questions. The first one, is the big economic plan part of the transformation plan for the council? Is it one part or is it?
Who's best to answer that question?
It'll probably be Ross at the moment because Ben's up here.
And in short, no, they're two different things. So the economic plan is a partnership plan, whereas the transformation programme would be our own internal transformation.
Okay, great, thank you. And my other questions relate to the on page 269 and 268. 269. On paragraph 26, it's actually about the public consultation. And because it's part of budget scrutiny, it's about looking at the policy, but also public interest. Has any of the public consultation that's been had 26 and 27 actually reflected in the budget figures for the proposed budget, or how it's going to be spent across the directorates? And because I note that on paragraph 26, it talks about reduced, resident council tax.
Maybe Councillor Harvey, if you can maybe respond to that. Has the consultation been reflected in the figures that we have in front of us today?
Broadly speaking, yes. The consultation didn't start when any of us wanted it to start because of the uncertainties over the settlement. And as a consequence, we're still crunching the data on the online consultation, which we were able to keep open for longer. We did complete the face-to-face consultations in the market towns and the road shows that we did, and received some early feedback from those results. And broadly speaking, what we've brought forward as a budget has been in alignment with the comments that we received from the public. At the time when the roadshows were going on, we were at risk of needing to make deeper cuts and broader savings than we have ended up doing, which is a better position than we were presenting to the public at that time. And we did have feedback on concerns that the public had about some of the potential areas of funding contraction that we were looking at needing to consider. And fortunately, we've been able to rein back on those. And clearly, one of those areas is £1 million that we haven't had to cut from the public realm contract, which is good news for E&E. That's a stop.
Out of 315 million.
Yes, I mean, it would be nice to have the 315 million we need to bring the roads up to the standard that is acceptable.
Can I interrupt? I'm going a bit off point. I think the point is some of the consultation has been included, but not all the consultation. So probably what my recommendation would be at the moment is that we have a summary of consultation results be published together with the changes made to the budget as a result of feedback, maybe going to the cabinet committee, so then we can see what the feedback was and how it's influenced your budget.
Well, that's the plan anyway. That will
Great. So it's
happen
at that point. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Right. So can I move on to the next question, Councillor Shaw, and Swindle first.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief one for probably for Councillor Toynbee. The budget assumes that children's services remain within the council, and at the moment we're sitting here with some uncertainty. Can committee be assured that some work has been done on an alternative budget with a separate children's trust, and what effect that might have on the ability for the council to manage the budget? Not expecting any of that to be published, but at least to have an assurance that that work has been done, so that if the situation does arise, we're not starting at ground zero. Thank you.
So sorry, was that directed to Councillor Toynbee?
I think it's Councillor Toynbee, because I think Councillor Toynbee will aware of any work that's been done on that scenario, and she might be able to provide the committee with the assurance required.
Yes, thank you.
If you could turn your microphone on as well.
Sorry. Yes, thank you for the question. As you know, that would be an absolutely huge piece of work, and one that we wouldn't want to do unless it was necessary. We are looking at, we obviously have to consider all options, and as I know you understand, we have to be careful what we say in public meetings at the moment, but I hope we'll be getting an update very soon. Thank you.
All right, I invite other questions now also on the MF and medium-term financial strategy as well. So Councillor Swinglehurst, and then Fagan.
Thank you, Chair.
Just conscious we have 15 minutes left until some of the members.
I'll be as quick as possible. And actually, it's fortunate because it follows on a little bit from what Councillor Shaw was asking about. So on page 274, there's a separate line of £4 million for all ages social care budget, which is identified in risks as to use to offset the risk in children. Quote, the results of the review of the Commissioner for Children's Services and financial implications for required improvements expected to be reported, blah, blah, blah. The council has allocated funds in the all ages social care budget. The question that's in my mind is, how does this all ages social care budget apply across the two directorates? So is it going to be 50-50, or it doesn't sound like it? Sounds like it's going to be more in Councillor Toynbee's, but is there some flexibility around it? I just don't know how it's going to function, so that would be my first question.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it is still sort of in development, should we say. You know, I don't know if Hilary, you can add anything?
I don't think I can really add anything other than to say we would keep it under review and look at whatever proposals we would need to make from within that fund.
So it serves as a sort of backstop fund for both, depending who is going to need to draw down. Okay, right, thank you.
And the two directorates are working more and more closely together, so it's probably a reflection of that.
Yeah, because there is that work around care and prevention and that area.
And transition
that's,
to adults.
which you would have in common, and it makes sense to create some funding around that, if that's the kind of central purpose. But the risk mitigation sort of was another. Felt like you're kind of using the same money twice, I think. So, but that's fine. Okay, so my other question is, I really for Councillor Crockett, it's around the level of confidence, the savings identified by move away from agency to permanence, given the national problem with recruitment here. What's the level of confidence that you're going to achieve that, and how many posts are we actually talking about? Because it's sort of in percentage terms, as it were. And I was just going to note that's very happy to see home share has made it onto the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swinburne. I know how passionate you are about home share, and we will keep pushing on that one. Hilary might want to come in a second with some more detail, but we all appreciate and understand the difficulty with recruiting, and especially with the domiciliary care market, it's particularly difficult. But we are working well with Hoople, we're working well with the NHS, trying to encourage people into the care industry. So, do you want to add anything to that? Vacancies?
Yes, through you, Chair. We have around 20 vacancies for social workers that we're currently having to fill with agency workers. I think what we've seen is the number of permanent staff has stayed relatively static. We've lost people, but we've also been able to recruit. So we have been able to recruit, and we're conscious of that. I think for me, and it's part of the transformation, is what's that offer we're making to social workers to attract them to Herefordshire. We've got some great, there's some great things going on in Herefordshire that should really encourage, that I don't think we promote well enough in our current recruitment. And that's part of why we're launching the microsite, so we can really talk about the benefits of being an adult social care worker in a county where we've got talk community, where we've got all of these community resources. Those are the sort of things that I know from sort of national forums and talking to people really make the difference in terms of people making that decision about where they want to work. So yes, they'll be supported professionally, but they have that great raft of kind of community assets to draw on as well. So for me, it's about how we really describe that offer of what's in Herefordshire, and I think we will be able to recruit people. It's part, the whole transformation strategy for me is about showing what we can offer and being able to attract people in. There will still be some reliance on agency staff, but not to the level that we've currently got. It would be where I would want to get to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor.
Yes, Councillor Harvey, it wouldn't be a budget meeting without me going on about economy and environment, would it? And I don't want to surprise you at this late stage either by not mentioning it. Economy and environment is just about trade and water if you look at the percentage allocation. Taking out central as a half after listening to what Andrew said, central covered, it's round about just under 60%. That covers quite a nature of challenges. I mean, there's a nasty little cut in there to waste collection services where bank holidays will no longer be covered. In fact, that affected me in Christmas Day, as it were. I think one of my neighbours to cover me on at least Boxing Day.
Getting to your question, Councillor.
Yes, my question is, how do we get out of this position of always seemingly looking to economy and environment as being the main, I think, sufferer in terms of budget allocation? I know we can talk about the 460 million that we've been robbed of by national government over the years, but if you look at this particular budget, it's not balanced. It's so concentrated on statutory services, over 60% maybe more, and where our residents pay their money for and where they think they should get the services from is in economy and environment. So my worry is that this budget is actually going to lead to cuts in services beyond just the one that I've mentioned on the bank holiday waste collections. And I just want to really know what can we do to get out of this sort of picture that we seem to face every year.
No, I understand and I share your concerns. And, you know, it has been the case that over a number of years, we've looked to economy and environment where our technical and non-statutory services sit, to, you know, sort of carry a larger proportion of the savings that we've needed to make because of our responsibilities statutorily for the people services across adults and children. I think how we start to get ourselves out of this situation, and you know what I will say is that when people pay their council tax, they are paying to contribute towards the society that is created by the services that the council delivers in its entirety for Herefordshire. It's not a case of saying, you know, I live in a market town, you know, I'm prepared to pay for street cleaning and street lighting and getting my bin picked up, and, you know, I'm fit and healthy, so I don't want to pay for social care services and, you know, to protect children and that sort of thing. We all make a contribution to the services that we hope we may never be in receipt of, so that the few that are unfortunate enough to need those services have them in their hour of need, and that provides the society in this county that means that we don't have people homeless on the streets, we have somebody looking after them, that we do have the support there for families in crisis and for children in difficulties, that we do have care for disabled adults, and we have care provision appropriate to the needs of people as we get older. So none of us should expect to get services delivered to us which equate to the amount of money that we pay in council tax every month. But having said that, specifically, you can see in the budget this year that there are savings that are being forecast to be delivered in Children's Directorate as a consequence of the improvement plan starting to bear fruit in terms of reducing the number of looked after children, delivering our services in a different way, helping to support families, increasing the number of foster carers, etc., etc. And it will be by getting the costs under control in the Children's Directorate and by continuing to be successful in adults in managing that demand pipeline for adult services, which are a consequence of looking after vulnerable adults and also the increasing number of older people that we have to provide care services for, that will enable the pressure on E&E to start to be reversed. And I would hope to see that in the coming years.
I don't disagree with anything you said. What I'm trying to get at, the economy and environment percentage allocation was not like that in the past. We have seen a decline for years, and all I'm trying to get at is how do we reverse that decline? Because even with what you say, this authority does seem to be spending far more of its budget on statutory services than other authorities, unless you're going to come along with a table that suggests differently. I can't believe that there are other authorities that are only allocating about 16% to the majority of their services. And so I need to think whether we have a recommendation from that.
These aren't the majority. These aren't the majority of the services that we deliver. They may be the majority of the services that everybody sees, but that's not where the costs lie.
Oh, I agree. I'm not saying that isn't the case, but we do seem to, over the years, transformed into a statutory service delivery authority more and more.
Well, I think you'll see that across the piece actually, and I think that's a consequence of how local government's being funded these days.
I think in the interest of time, if you did want to think about if there was anything that you wanted to recommend from that, but I have two last members on my list of questions. Councillor Fagan and Councillor Watson, unless there's any further questions from Councillor Lester. Councillor Lester. So I have three, Fagan, Watson and Lester. And then we should then be able to conclude on revenue. Councillor Fagan? And we've got approximately 5 to 10 minutes, so if we can be as succinct as possible, that would be great.
Okay, thanks, Chair. It's really about the transformation strategy within children's. The information we've provided speaks quite a lot about the Edge of Care and Prevention offer, and obviously this is developed from looking at it from the budget point of view. The question comes from the needing to go into reserves in this financial year to support the children's services. It's really to find out, are we confident that the Edge of Care and Prevention offer is developed well enough to be able to actually lead to a reduction in numbers of looked after children in within this financial year? Because I think that that's quite important that we get a grasp of that. Or is it likely that we're not developed enough and things can spiral out of control again?
Councillor Toynbee, is it?
Yes, good question. I completely agree. That is really important, and we need to make progress fast. And the more that we do of that preventative service, the more we will be able to bring the budget down in future years. I am confident that in future financial years, the Children's Directorate won't be such a large share, because we have had to invest a lot in stabilising things. And when I talk to counterparts around the country, this is what happens at a sort of turning point like this. But I completely agree, we've got to get that balance better, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Watson, Councillor Lester.
Yes, mine is a very quick question. It's actually about income, and I've noticed it's always really good to look at the previous figures from what was given to Cabinet last year. And this year, I can see that there's a 7 million difference and a 2 million difference, a 7 million difference for council tax and a 2 million difference for business rates, and this for 23-24. So, and it's really sad to see that, for me being around rural proofing, to see that the rural sparsity delivery grant remains static year on year. It would be really nice to get that up, but that's a central government issue. How are income figures derived, and are there any significant year-on-year changes?
I think we'll throw that one to you.
Well, our income figures that we're in control of, so that doesn't account for things like schools grant, which passes through us like a pipe and goes straight to the schools. So the things that we have some control over are, council tax. The business rates are determined by government, and we collect them on government's behalf, and we are in receipt of funds from government as a consequence of the let-offs on business rate that government has decided to apply to small businesses, etc. So we are compensated for the business rates that aren't collected as a consequence of government choices in supporting business now and through COVID, etc. We're in E&E. Part of the transformation work that is planned is looking at, as Ross said in his presentation, at new income streams from some of the services that we deliver, and that's following on other local authorities, sort of focusing on delivering those sorts of services and learning the lessons from developing those. So, we're looking to be fast followers on some of that. I know income and charging is something that I have suggested to Scrutiny that they may wish to look at. It's been quite a few years since income and charging is something that Scrutiny's paid attention to, and it may be that there's more that we can do there, that you can identify and encourage us on. You can see in terms of the information on the under total funding in the table there that is showing on page 275, where the other income streams are coming from, some of which don't carry on through the entirety of the MTFS because they become wrapped into the social care funding reforms as best as we understand them. And you can see what we're predicting in terms of council tax increases, and that will be, you know, partly as a consequence of us increasing the council tax base through delivering new homes.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Lester.
Thank you. We heard earlier on, much earlier on, actually, about Councillor Harvey's faith in the fact that these savings could be delivered. 14.1 million pounds worth of savings. I think one thing we haven't discussed today is the impact of 4.99% on council taxpayers, and I think council taxpayers are going to be focused on that significant increase. So I think my question would be to the leader of the council, to Councillor Hitchener. Those 14.1 million pounds worth of savings were across 4 directorates. Are you confident that that's the maximum amount of savings that can be delivered? Because if just a fraction more savings from each one of those directorates could be achieved, then, you know, you could be looking at knocking off 1% from that increase. So my question really is, can there be more savings so that we just don't assume that the budget should be the maximum, which is, as we know, under a referendum threshold, 4.99%. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Lester. It's a fair question. Could we make more savings? I think it would be very hard to do that. Maybe I can push that back to the Scrutiny Committee and say, if you want to come up with some ways of increasing savings, where would you identify those areas? We have spent many months working on this and trying to find a reasonable middle course which we think we have achieved. But if you do have ideas, then please, I think this is the time for you to come up with those proposals rather than for us to be looking around for other proposals. Yes, it's regrettable, a 4.99% increase. We would much prefer to have something less than that. We would point out that part of the increase goes towards subsidising people who can't afford to pay the increase. So I think we are sympathetic in a very practical way to people who are feeling the pinch most heavily, and we do say to people who can afford to pay, please pay, and to those who cannot afford, then they should be approaching us and asking whether the funding which we have created, which is evident from the papers, which we've created, and that money can be allocated appropriately.
I think Councillor Harvey wanted to comment as well.
Yes, thank you. I mean, that going back to the questions that we were asked at the front end of the meeting, you know, what were the tough decisions that we had to make? This was one of the toughest decisions, but it's clear from the local government settlement that at national government level, the assumption has been that every single council in this country raises the council tax to the maximum that they have been allowed to, and those are the assumptions at government level that lead to the increases in the overall core funding that have been highly publicised and shouted from the rooftops as being, you know, a really good settlement for local government. So nationally, the assumption is that local tax raising powers are wielded to the maximum, and as has been said earlier in this meeting, the blunt instrument of looking at national level, at the level of reserves that sit across all local authorities, that local authorities are squeezed in order to extract those reserves from local authorities, whether they have them or not, because they don't lie evenly across all local authorities. And we are fortunate to be able to present a budget to you which does not rely on us subsidising next year's budget with contributions from our reserves. So we are fortunate. Many other councils are not, and are actually having to issue 141 notices, etc., saying that they're incapable of delivering a balanced budget because they do not have the reserves that government assumes, because they can see it top level, totted up, sit broadly across the council base. We are proposing the continuation of 100% council tax discount for the households that qualify, and that's an important continuation of the support to the least well-off households in the county. And we are also, in addition, as you can see from the information that's provided in the presentation pack, we are targeting an additional £1.7 million to provide a fund for households facing hardship as a consequence of the cost of living emergency that we're all encountering at the moment. So this is one of the hardest choices that we've had to make, decisions that we've had to make. It's not really been a choice because of the national government assumptions about how local government will act. But where we feel that council tax continues to be the fairest way of raising tax locally, because there is an assumption that the council tax banding system recognises that people with higher value homes are generally supposed to be in a position better able to pay a greater proportion of the council tax, and that's the way it's set up. So better people who are better off are asked to continue to contribute to the council tax as they do. And we have, £1.7 million of additional funding on top of the council tax discount and other grant arrangements that we're continuing to administer coming through from central government, provides a really large, equivalent to 1.5% of the council tax rise, targeted specifically at supporting the least well-off in the county. Now, I don't know off the top of my head how much the council tax would need to be reduced by to equate to that amount of funding being available to the least well-off households in the county, but it would be significant. And we feel that this is the fairest way for us to balance out enabling those who are fortunate enough to continue to contribute to council tax to do so, whilst supporting those households which are finding it increasingly difficult to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I think that draws us to the conclusion of our revenue budget discussion. So I look to John to see if he can summarise any of the recommendations that have been raised through the discussion, please. So she's bringing up on screen.
Chair, we're over the 3 hours, right? What's your intention in terms of another agenda item? I don't know.
Hopefully finish this and then we can make a decision as to what we do, if that's okay, Councillor Shaw. So then we can allow all our guests to leave.
Okay, so the recommendations I've captured, there were three. The summary of the consultation results will be published in preparation for the Cabinet meeting, together with the changes made to the budget as a result of the feedback received. That a narrative, that a narrative be provided to justify the inflation figures used for the budget and the MTFS. And that the committee recommends that the Cabinet set up a working group to consider where and how other local authorities are reversing the trend of reducing percentage allocations of budget to economy and environment priorities.
Now, was that a specific recommendation that was sent to you from Councillor Stapp?
Do you want that one as well? Based on worst case scenario for the MTAs?
I think that got adjusted to the recommendation that is on screen now.
Do you think that's sufficient? Okay.
So members, if I can just go through each of these recommendations in turn. So the first one, are you comfortable with the wording?
Yes.
Yep.
First one, second one, the narrative. And the third one, which has been proposed by Councillor Stark, comments on the third one?
Chair, I just thought in our first recommendation, I think we said the words year-on-year changes. I think it's implied, but I think that's what we actually said.
I think it's for this budget specifically, so the consultation that was done during December.
If you're happy with that, I'll give the point.
Chair.
Councillor Summers and then Councillor Fee.
I'm just not sure that consultation results really make a big difference. The figures are very low compared to the audience, and it's just a minority that's making their opinion known. I'm not sure it's suitable to be.
I think that's down to the administration to determine whether it's suitable to take on board, but I think as would be useful, I think the scrutiny committee to understand what the consultation results are.
And there are more,
Hmm?
and David, there's more this year than there was last year,
I know,
the previous
it's
year.
very
So
much.
we have to thank the public,
Yeah.
and we have to demonstrate to the public that we are taking their points of view on board.
Any further comments on
Yeah,
the?
Chair, can I, oh, sorry.
Yes, Councillor Fee.
Yeah, it's just that I feel that as the scrutiny board, we need to accept the 4.99% uplift and also the financial support to households experiencing hardship, just to, acknowledge that we have looked at this.
Well, it ends up being a council decision as to whether the 4.99% is accepted. And I'm getting some challenge from the floor as to whether that is something that they would like to put forward for a recommendation. So just to be clear, can I see a show of hands of those that would like to see it as a recommendation? No, and those that would not like to see it put down as a recommendation that we support 4.99. That's four. So, 5. So I think, and those abstain, any abstentions? So I think in that point, it's not something that the committee wishes to put as a recommendation.
Can I just say something? It seems to me that with all the days we've spent on this and all the nights I've read stuff, that we have some kind of idea of what we think at the end of the day. And I don't like abstaining on anything, but I have concerns that why have a scrutiny committee if they can't come to a reasonable conclusion at the end of it? That's just me, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Councillor Summers, for your comments. At the end of the day, we are looking at whether it's balanced, robust, financial and legally compliant and deliverable, and I think we ask our questions to assure ourselves of that. And we have come up with a series of recommendations where we would like further information or further actions to be taken in order to have that assurance. So we have, I'm comfortable that we're in agreement with the first two. I just need clarification on the third one. Is everyone happy with the wording of the third recommendation? Committee recommend that Cabinet set up a working group to consider where and how other local authorities are reversing the trend of reducing percentage allocation of the budget to economy and environment priorities.
Can you just confirm that's after, not again, we're not talking about this budget?
Yes.
No, we're not talking this budget.
Oh, okay.
Because that's quite a quick.
Unless Councillor Davies was suggesting an amendment.
Hell no.
I think the first two are time for cabinet meeting, but the latter, I don't know whether we need to.
Can we make sure that says future?
I think the narrative on the MTFS and the budget was for the next budget. I don't think they
there was a commitment to do it this budget.
But are we putting clarity in the recommendation?
We could change the recommendation to the cabinet consider setting up a working group.
Yeah,
puts it into the
My
future.
intention was that the narrative for the
examine.
inflationary figures was for.
The
for this
first two
budget.
are for this budget,
Yeah.
and the third one is for next
It's
budget.
at some point.
So if we just add that clarity, with that clarity, members in agreement on the three recommendations, can I please see a show of hands in support? Thank you, so that is everyone, so that concludes agenda item 8. I would very much, well, I greatly thank all the officers and committees in attendance. We are trying to do budget slightly differently this year, and I appreciate all your input in today's meeting. If you would like to leave, whilst you're doing that, I will ask Nancy, we have.
Thank you, everybody.
Which is the report for the European Resources and Workforce Strategy. But I'd like to ask if you would like to continue with that, adjourn into the next meeting in March, or have a break for 5 minutes and then come back and finish. Any recommendations?
Chair, I think since we have no officers or cabinet members to talk to, the only sense it takes to make me is to adjourn.
Well, the agenda item 9 is just to confirm the recommendations that we, from our meeting in November.
You think we can do that anyway?
Yeah.
Do you
We
think?
don't
we
need
can do-
cabinet members.
Okay, fine.
So it's just putting to
Let's
you.
just crack on.
We crack on?
I think 5 minutes and
Yeah,
we'll be
let's just
finished.
crack on.
Okay.
Chrissy, I'm sorry, I have to go anyway. We'll be back by 6 and it's looking likely.
It's 5:18. So I think we can move on to, are we in agreement then to move on to agenda item 9, complete it, and then finish for the day?
We were going to have a 5-minute break or not?
No, I think we can finish it.
I think, I thought you'd gone. Okay, finish it, let's finish it. We can wait. Cross our legs a bit.
The chair will have the coldest meeting room in there for living.
So we have agenda item 9, scrutiny report, review of the human resources of workforce strategy. So it is to agree the report and recommendations from our meeting in November. So is everyone in agreement with what's in the report? Are there any amendments or changes that members would like to make? Councillor Stark.
Yes, Chair, if you remember, we agreed that the workforce strategy should reflect the fact that our workforce is made up of 75% female, 25% male. That should be a specific recommendation to be added to those that are already there. The workforce strategy should be designed to reflect the fact that we have a workforce of 75% female and 25% male. It's not being specific, it's just something that should be designed with that in mind. It's up to the HR experts to decide what that means in terms of responding to things like childcare or more flexible working or whatever else is required.
Yeah.
In order to make the best use of the fact that 75% of our workforce is female.
You can almost add that onto the record. There's a recommendation around childcare, but it's quite specific to say both male and female, but it could, it would not be, I think.
Yeah, but it's not being
inappropriate
specific, it's not being
to
specific,
say,
it's
you know,
not
within the context of 75% of the workforce being female and 95% something part-time, isn't it?
There was a recommendation about wanting serious data on gender pay gap.
Yeah.
Which, when talking to the officers about that, it was formulated around the recruitment strategies and trying to attract more people to work parents councils and people like.
Yeah.
But I can take.
I think it's a slightly different issue,
Yeah.
but it was things like childcare provision or, you know, how do we support that?
Yeah, so we can include that.
Workforce, yeah.
Any other comments?
Could I wasn't at the meeting, Chair, sorry, but something that I feel very strongly, which is brought up in recommendation 3 and recommendation 5, is I'm not clear how the data that is captured, around Lever's report is integrated within actually service, within the directorates. We're seeing it at a high level, but it says that the balance of evidence says a Lever's report that key issues where council could improve pay conditions, career progression opportunities, and clear organisational direction, better leadership and better access to training. Well, those last 4 points are actually to do with the directorate or the managers, to give career progression, as a manager. That's what you're hoping that your staff is doing. So how can we not just leave it within a strategy, but how do we know that managers are actually, what level are we talking about?
So what would be your specific recommendations?
Well,
I
think it's about the learning and development offer. I suppose it's really to say that it's a KPI within the management level, is that they are using the Lever's report as a way of, in their PPI, in their, what do they call it now? Rapid appraisal.
I don't know how you'll make that a KPI.
You can't.
I know, because it's going to be a process of words
Yes.
that you'll try to make into a number. So I don't know how you're going to make that.
Okay.
So it's got to be a behavioural sort of assumption that of these Lever's reports and the exit interviews you've had, that somewhere they've been listened to, adopted, and acted on. I don't know how you're going to make that a number.
No, I don't want it to be a number, right, Liz, but sorry.
I was just going to say, I think it's possibly the other end of the telescope where the staff survey can hopefully identify the aspirations and opportunities for staff and build that into the manager's approach, because I think
I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
Staff survey
which is in the strategy,
Thank you.
which is I think already in the strategy.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so at the moment, we've just got the one recommendation to update the report. Any other comments from committee?
So was that what Councillor Stark said about the investigation of the difference between male and female?
Yes, I'll ask,
Okay.
read it out, please.
Yeah, the proposal was that the workforce strategy be designed to reflect 75% female and 25% male to develop and inform policies that support the workforce.
Or should reflect the makeup of the workforce, which is currently 75%.
So is that a recommendation 6 on the 5 that are already in the report?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. To reflect the makeup of the workforce, which is currently
Presumably not enough women.
5%. So if everyone's in agreement with that, can I please see a show of hands? Great, so we have approved agenda item 9. So that just leaves agenda item 10, date of the next meeting, which is Tuesday, the 14th of March. I've requested clarity to ensure that is during the pre-election period. And I've requested clarity from the statutory scrutiny officer that we are still able to proceed with business as usual and undertake our committee meeting, and I've been assured that we can.
Yeah, the assumption is that during the pre-election period, that business as usual continues. So we'll work on the assumption that this is business as usual items. The only aspect we need to just be cautious about is any promotion that may be, undertaken around the committee, which will still be the legal minimum standards and publishing the papers.
I guess we'd have to take more care because it's recorded also. So we have to be careful with that aspect of it. We can't be politicking.
That's correct, yeah. So I think we can proceed with the 14th March meeting.
I moved on quickly. Moved on quickly today. I wanted to ask, we've approved our report. What happens to it now? Does it go to cabinet?
Yes.
Okay, so we've, in that approving it, we've agreed it goes to cabinet.
Yes, and the amendment that we have made will also be reflected in the minutes that we signed off at the beginning of the meeting.
And it'll go to the next available relevant cabinet meeting. Okay. Actually go to the next meeting because there's an open item on scrutiny reports, isn't there?
I'm not quite sure which one I'll go to.
Well, no, there's an open item on scrutiny report, so the next one that's suitable for an agenda, I would have thought.
There is, the report and recommendations will be provided to Cabinet. The report itself won't be discussed by Cabinet, they'll be asked us to respond to it.
Okay, right.
And any other comments before I close the meeting? Thank you very much. 17:26, close the meeting. And live stream can be ended, please.
Please.
Thank you.